The decree reached the servants before it reached the court. That was always how it worked in Ashenvale. The palace had ears in every corridor, and those ears belonged to the people who polished the floors, and carried the firewood, and refilled the ink bottles on cold mornings. They heard things first. They understood things first. And when they did not understand, they whispered. And the whisper moved faster than any official announcement ever could. The decree, in its formal version, was 3 lines written in the Duke's own hand, on heavy cream paper. His steward, a thin man named Oliver Creed who had served the house for 22 years without once raising his voice, read it twice before he folded it. He stood in the corridor outside the Duke's private study for a long moment. Then he walked to the household records room, opened the cabinet that contained the files of every noble family in the realm, and began to look. What the decree said, stripped of its formal language, was this: find a woman of good enough birth to satisfy the law. She should be quiet. She should be obedient. She should not draw attention. She should be, above everything else, ordinary. The word the Duke had used in his own hand was plain. The plain one will do, he had written. And then, below that, in smaller script, that suggested it was an afterthought, though Oliver Creed knew perfectly well it was not. She should not be the kind of woman people look at twice. Oliver Creed had served the Duke of Ashenvale for 7 years. He had served the Duke's father before that, for 15. He understood that some instructions were practical, and some were grief-wrapped in the language of practicality, and this one was both. He did not judge it. He began his search. The Duke himself, at the moment his steward was folding the decree, was standing at the narrow window of his study, looking out at the training yard below. He watched 2 younger men practice swordwork in the pale morning light. He watched without really seeing them. His eyes moved, but they were not tracking the movement below. They were tracking something else entirely, something that existed only behind them, in the space between seeing and remembering. His name was Kalen Voss. He was 32 years old. He had fought in 2 border campaigns before he was 25, and he had governed the eastern province of Ashenvale since his father died, which was 4 years ago now. He was not a cruel man. He was not an unkind man. He was a man who had learned, at considerable personal cost, that certain kinds of feeling did not mix well with certain kinds of responsibility, and he had decided, carefully and deliberately, to stop mixing them. His first wife had been beautiful. He did not think of her by name, not in the mornings, not when the light was thin and cold and the training yard was just starting to fill. He had a system for this, one he had built over 3 years, and it held most of the time. In the mornings, before the day fully arrived, it sometimes did not hold as well as he liked. He turned away from the window. He picked up the papers on his desk and began to read them, and by the time Oliver Creed knocked on his door an hour later, the system was holding fine. "The search," Oliver said, without ceremony, because the Duke did not like ceremony in private. "I have a list." "How long?" 14 names. Initially. I have reduced it to 6, on the basis of your stated requirements. Oliver set the list on the desk. He did not sit. He never sat in the Duke's study, unless he was specifically invited to, and he was rarely specifically invited to. The first 3 are daughters of houses that still have enough political weight that the match would carry implications you may not wish to carry. The 4th is already informally promised elsewhere. The 5th is, by all accounts, genuinely exceptional in several ways that would seem to contradict your requirements. And the 6th? Oliver's expression did not change. It never really did. Lady Mara Aldine, 3rd daughter of Lord Edmund Aldine, of the Western Holdings. The house is minor. It has maintained its crest, but not much else. She is 24 years old. She has not been to court. She has not been presented at any formal occasion of note. There is very little written about her, which I will confess is somewhat unusual in itself, but the absence of information is not, I think, troubling. Some families simply do not make noise. The Duke looked at the list without picking it up. Is she ordinary? Every account I can find suggests so, yes. Then write to Lord Aldine. Oliver picked up the list. Shall I wait for your review of the other names? No. Oliver left. The Duke returned to his papers. Outside, in the training yard, one of the young men landed a hit, and the other swore loudly enough to be heard through the closed window. The Duke turned a page. He did not look up. In the Western Holdings, in a house that smelled of old wood and good candle wax, and the particular kind of quiet that comes from a family that has learned to live carefully within its means. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Lord Edmund Aldine read it at his breakfast table. His wife Eleanor sat across from him. Their eldest daughter Clara was visiting with her husband. Their second daughter Penelope had married well the previous spring and was currently occupied with her first child. The letter, therefore, was read in a household that contained only Lord Edmund, his wife, one daughter on a visit, and somewhere upstairs, almost certainly still asleep, their third daughter. Clara read the letter after her father. She set it down. She looked at her mother. Her mother looked at her hands. "Mara," Lord Edmund said, and his voice had the careful quality of a man choosing his words before he is entirely sure what he means to say. "We should ask Mara. She will say yes," Eleanor said quietly. "We do not know that." "She will say yes," Eleanor said again, and she was right, and they all knew it, and none of them liked knowing it. Mara was upstairs when her father knocked on her door. She was not asleep. She had been awake since before dawn, which was not unusual for her. She was sitting in the chair by her window, reading. The window of her room looked east, over the low hills that marked the edge of the family's land, and in the early morning, the light came through it in long, pale strips. She read by that light when she could. She preferred it to candles. She opened the door when her father knocked, and looked at his face, and knew, before he had said anything, that something had changed. "Come down," her father said. "There is something we need to speak about." She came down. She sat at the table. She read the letter her father handed her. She read it once, which was enough, and then she set it down the way a person sets something down when they have finished with it, rather than when they are putting it aside. "When do they need an answer?" she asked. "Within the fortnight." "I will go," she said. Her father looked at her. Her mother looked at her. Clara, from across the table, started to say something, and then stopped. "Mara," her father began. "It is a good match for the family," she said. "It is a reasonable thing." She stood. "I am going to finish my chapter." She went back upstairs. Clara waited until the sound of Mara's footsteps had passed completely, before she turned to her parents. "She did not even ask what he is like," she said. "She knows what he is like," Eleanor said. "Everyone knows what he is like." "That is not comforting, Mother." It was not meant to be. What everyone knew about the Duke of Ashenvale was this: he was respected, and he was cold. He had governed well by every measurable standard. The roads in the eastern province were better than they had been in his father's time. The tax disputes that had simmered for a decade had been resolved with a firmness that satisfied everyone except the parties who had been profiting from the ambiguity. He was fair. He was effective. He was not, by any account, warm. His first wife, Lady Isabel Vane, had been the daughter of a northern lord known for producing remarkable children. She had been remarkable. She had been lovely and sharp and genuinely kind, the kind that is not performance but character, and she had died of a fever 2 years into the marriage. She had been 26. The Duke had been 29. He had closed the door of her rooms after the funeral, and it had not been opened since. The court had given him a year, which was generous. Then it had begun watching, which was inevitable. Then it had begun speculating, which was unavoidable. Men of his position did not remain unmarried. They had duties that extended beyond their own feelings, and feelings, in any case, were not something a governing lord was encouraged to place too high in his list of priorities. The Duke had tolerated the watching and the speculating for 3 years. Then he had written his decree. Oliver Creed, carrying the accepted reply from Lord Aldine back to the Duke, passed through the main hall of the palace, and was stopped twice by members of the court who had heard, already, that an inquiry had gone out. He answered their questions the way he answered most questions, with a face that communicated nothing, and a silence that communicated slightly less than nothing. By the time he reached the study door, 2 minor lords and 1 very senior lady of the court had separately decided to investigate the matter further on their own. The one who would matter was Lady Vene Surratt. She was 41 years old. She had been at court for 20 years. She was elegant in the way that long practice makes elegant, and she was intelligent in the way that goes beyond cleverness into something that functions more like patience. She had been considered for a ducal match 3 times in her life. Each time, circumstances had prevented it, and 2 of those times the circumstances had been, in her private assessment, manufactured rather than natural. She had made her peace with this, or she had learned to wear the face of a woman who has made her peace with it, which amounted to the same thing in a court, where faces were the primary currency. When she heard the name Aldine, she did not immediately know it. That was interesting, because she knew almost everything. She went to her own records that evening and found almost nothing, which was more interesting still. She lit a second candle and began to write letters. Mara, meanwhile, was packing. She did not pack the way Clara would have packed, which was to say she did not treat it as a performance of arriving. She packed what she needed. 2 good dresses for formal occasions, several practical ones. Books, selected with the care of someone who knows they will have limited space and unlimited time. A small box that she placed at the bottom of the trunk without opening it first, which meant she had decided in advance what she was doing with it, which meant she had thought about this already, which meant she had been thinking about it for longer than the letter had been in the house. She packed, last of all, the cloak. It was a plain cloak. It was made of good quality wool, dark gray, without ornament. The hood was deep. Clara, watching from the doorway, almost said something about it. It was not the kind of cloak you brought to a ducal palace. It was not the kind of cloak a young woman brought anywhere she wanted to be seen well. It was the kind of cloak you wore when you did not particularly want to be seen at all. Clara did not say anything. She had learned, over 24 years of being Mara's older sister, that there was a category of things Mara did that could not be argued with, not because Mara was stubborn, but because Mara was always, infuriatingly, slightly ahead of whatever argument you were about to make. The morning Mara left, her mother held her for a moment longer than usual. Her father shook her hand, and then seemed to think better of it, and held her arm briefly at the elbow, which was as close as he came to embracing her. Clara stood at the door and watched the carriage until it was gone, and then went inside before she could decide how she felt about it. The journey to the capital took 4 days. Mara spent them reading. The carriage was not comfortable, but she had brought a cushion, and she was not the kind of person who required comfort in order to be content. She watched the landscape change through the window when she was not reading. She ate the food the family cook had packed for her, simply and without ceremony. She slept when she was tired, and woke when she was not. She did not ask the driver how much further. She did not count the miles. On the 4th day, as the carriage rolled through the capital's outer gates and the city began to press in on both sides, she closed her book and looked out the window. The city was large and loud and full of a kind of energy that felt almost aggressive after the quiet of the Western holdings. People moved fast here. Even the sounds moved fast. She watched a baker argue with a customer over the price of bread, both of them speaking at the speed of people who assumed the other person was keeping up. A child chased a dog through the narrow gap between 2 stalls. A woman in a dress far more expensive than anything Mara had packed leaned out of an upper window and said something sharp to someone below. Mara watched all of it with the steady, unhurried attention she gave to most things. She pulled the hood of her plain gray cloak up as the carriage turned toward the palace road, not because the air was cold, though it was cold, but because it was a habit. She had worn the hood for so long that not wearing it required a specific decision. She did not make that decision. The palace, when it appeared at the end of the road, was exactly what she had expected from the descriptions she had read. Large, old, built for authority rather than comfort. It wore its age well, the way buildings do when they have been genuinely maintained rather than merely preserved. The stones were clean. The grounds were ordered. There were guards at the gate, and they checked the carriage papers with thoroughness rather than ceremony, which she noted as a point in the Duke's favor. Thoroughness was worth something. They took her to a receiving room. A woman named Agnes, who managed the household staff with the focused efficiency of someone who has no patience for wasted time, showed her the rooms she would use, and explained the daily schedule of the household, with the same tone she might use to explain the layout of a storage cupboard. Mara listened. She asked 3 questions, all of them practical. Agnes answered them and appeared, in a very restrained way, to approve of both the questions and the fact that there were only 3. Mara unpacked her trunk. She placed her books on the shelf. She hung her dresses. She set the small box on the table by the window without opening it, the same way she had packed it. She stood at the window of her new rooms and looked out at the palace grounds. A man was crossing the courtyard below, walking with the kind of deliberate pace that suggested he was going somewhere specific and had already decided not to be delayed. He did not look up. She had no way of knowing who he was from that distance. But something in the way he walked, the straight line of it, the quality of contained movement, as though he had decided exactly how much space in the world he was going to occupy and no more, made her think she was probably looking at the Duke. She did not wave. He did not look up. He crossed the courtyard and was gone through a far door, and she turned away from the window and went to find the books she had decided to read first. Tomorrow there would be a formal audience. She had been told it would last no more than an hour. She had been given instructions about how to dress and where to stand and what to say when addressed. She had read the instructions once and set them aside and decided to be what she was, which was the thing she had always done, and which had, so far, served her well enough. The candle on her table burned low. She read until it went out and then sat in the dark for a while, listening to the palace settle around her, all its old stones adjusting to the cold of the night the way old stones do, with patience and without complaint. She was comfortable with the dark. She was comfortable with most things, if she was honest, which she generally was, if only with herself. The morning would come. She would face what it brought. She blew out the last of the candle smoke and went to sleep. The formal audience was scheduled for 10 in the morning. At 9:55, Mara was standing in the anteroom outside the Hall of Mirrors, wearing her best dress, which was a deep blue, that her mother had always said suited her, and her plain gray cloak over it, the hood down, because she was indoors, and because Agnes had given her a look that communicated quite clearly that hoods were not appropriate for formal presentations. She had left the hood down. She was not unreasonable. She could hear people on the other side of the door. Not voices exactly. The sound of a room that contains many people who are all deliberately not making noise. A particular kind of charged silence. The kind that presses against walls. She had read about courts in books. She had understood them as a concept. Standing outside the door, listening to that layered quiet, was the first moment she began to understand them as a physical experience. Oliver Creed, standing just inside the threshold, announced her name in a voice that carried through the room, with the precision of a man who has done this many times and has eliminated all unnecessary effort from the act. Her full name, her family, her region of origin. It took 4 seconds. She walked through the door. The Hall of Mirrors was named for the panels of polished metal along its eastern wall, installed before glassmaking had advanced enough to produce true mirrors, and which now reflected the room in a way that was slightly distorted, elongated, slightly wrong, the way you look in water, that is mostly still, but not entirely. The room was long. There were people arranged along both sides, court members of various ranks, all of them turned toward the center, with the focused attention of people who have decided that something worth watching is about to happen. At the far end, elevated by 2 steps on a narrow dais, stood the Duke. She had known he was tall from his reputation, which mentioned it the way reputations mention things that are useful for forming an initial picture. What the reputation had not mentioned was the specific quality of his stillness. He was not standing at attention in the military sense. He was not performing composure. He was simply still, the way a door is still when it has been closed properly, with a sense of weight behind it. He did not move as she walked toward him. She walked at a pace she had decided on beforehand. Not fast, not slow, the pace of a person who knows where she is going and is not afraid of arriving. She did not look at the people arranged along the sides of the room. She looked at the Duke, because he was the only person in the room whose face would tell her anything useful. His face told her almost nothing, which was itself information. He watched her approach with the expression of a man conducting an inventory, which was exactly what Oliver Creed had warned her to expect. His eyes moved over her with a quick, thorough efficiency, and then settled somewhere near her collarbone, not meeting her eyes, not deliberately avoiding them, simply done with the survey and not requiring more. She stopped at the prescribed distance. She gave the prescribed greeting, which she delivered clearly and without inflection, because inflecting it in any direction, warmth, nerves, deference, would have been a kind of performance, and she was not performing. "Lady Aldine," the Duke said. His voice was what she had expected. Low, even, the kind of voice that does not vary much, regardless of what is behind it. "Welcome to Ashenvale." "Thank you, Your Grace," she said. There was a pause that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, which in a room full of watching people, felt considerably longer. "You have traveled 4 days," he said. It was not a question. He had the information. Yes, Your Grace. Are your rooms adequate? More than adequate. Agnes has been very helpful. Something that was not quite a reaction moved across his face. Not surprise. Perhaps the very distant cousin of surprise. Agnes was thorough and professional, and she was not, by anyone's description, particularly easy to work with until you understood her system. That Mara had identified her as helpful within the first 12 hours suggested something, though he did not immediately decide what. Good, he said, and then, after another pause, we will speak more formally this afternoon. Creed will give you the schedule. He looked past her, at the room in general, in the way that means a thing is concluded. You are welcome to the library and the East Gardens. The household staff will answer any questions you have. That was it. That was the audience. She had been prepared for approximately 45 minutes of formal discussion, covering the terms of the arrangement, the expectations of both parties, the timeline for the formal betrothal. She had, apparently, been prepared for a different Duke than the one who actually existed. She gave the closing greeting. She walked back toward the door at the same pace she had arrived. Behind her, she could feel the room shift slightly, the way a room of watching people shifts when they have seen something and are now processing what they saw. At the door, she paused just long enough to settle the hood of her cloak, not over her head, simply back onto her shoulders, a small adjustment. She went through. In the Hall of Mirrors, after the door had closed, Lady Vene Surratt turned to the woman standing beside her and said, very quietly, "Interesting." The woman beside her, a Lady Claire Finch, who had been at court for 8 years, and knew enough to understand when Surratt was being genuinely interested, rather than performatively so, said, equally quietly, "In what way?" She was not nervous, Surratt said. "Is that interesting?" "It is very interesting." Surratt looked at the door for a moment. Every woman who has walked into this room for any kind of formal presentation in the last 4 years has been nervous. It is the room. It is the Duke. It is the watching. She looked back at Lady Finch. She was not nervous. She was attentive. There is a difference. Lady Finch considered this. Perhaps she is simply confident. Confidence has a quality, Surratt said. What she had was something else. I am not sure yet what to call it. She turned back toward the front of the room, where the Duke was now speaking to Oliver Creed in a low voice. "But I will." The Duke, speaking to Oliver Creed, said, "She speaks directly." "I had that impression from her letter," Oliver said. The letter was 2 sentences. "It was direct," Oliver said. The Duke made a sound that was not quite an agreement, and not quite a dismissal. "The afternoon schedule. We will meet in the East drawing room, not the formal study." "Of course." Oliver made a note. She asked about the library last evening. Agnes says she was already reading when the household woke. What was she reading? Oliver consulted the small notebook he kept in his coat pocket. Agnes thought it was something historical, something with a red cover. "Aldine," the Duke said, not as a question. He was trying the name as a fact, feeling its edges. "A minor house, as I indicated. Very little historical material." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "That will be all, Creed." Oliver withdrew. The Duke stood on the dais a moment longer, looking at the door through which Mara Aldine had walked with the pace of a person who was not afraid of arriving, and the expression of a person conducting her own inventory. He had specified plain. Oliver had delivered plain. This was not a criticism. It was simply a note, the kind you make to yourself when reality has met expectation, and you are deciding how you feel about that. He decided he felt satisfied. He went to his study. The East drawing room, at 2 in the afternoon, was warmer than the Hall of Mirrors, and smaller than the formal study, and arranged with chairs that suggested conversation, rather than ceremony. Mara arrived at 2 exactly, which the Duke noted. He was already seated. He did not stand. She sat across from him with the ease of a person who has been sitting in chairs their whole life, and found nothing remarkable about any particular chair. "The arrangement," he said, because preamble seemed unnecessary. "Yes," she agreed. "You understand what is expected." I read the terms Oliver Creed sent with the initial letter. I have some questions. The Duke looked at her for a moment, not the inventory look of the morning, something more focused. "Ask them." The Eastern border negotiations, they are described in the terms as requiring spousal representation at formal occasions. I want to understand what that means in practice, specifically, whether it includes the Vethric delegations. Silence. Not the charged silence of the Hall of Mirrors, a different kind. The kind that happens when a person has said something that requires a moment of recalibration. You know about the Vethric delegations, the Duke said. It was not quite a question. They are not common knowledge, no, Mara said, but they are not a secret if you know where to read. The Eastern Province has had 3 trade inquiries from Vethric merchants in the last 5 years. The language is specialized. Most diplomatic interpreters in the capital do not have it. The Duke did not look away from her. And you? She answered his question by saying nothing, for precisely 1 second, which was the equivalent of saying yes, without making a point of it. The terms can be clarified, he said, after that second. His voice had not changed. The quality behind it had shifted by some degree that did not have a name. The Vethric delegations are intermittent. They require patience more than formal language, most of the time. I would expect so. He picked up the document that outlined the terms of the arrangement. He turned it to face her and indicated a section near the bottom. This clause. Your understanding of it. She read the clause. She looked up. It means the household finances of Ashenvale will remain under your management unless you choose to delegate specific accounts. Which is standard, and I have no objection to it. Most people read that clause as meaning something else. Most people read legal language with the meaning they would prefer it to have, rather than the meaning it carries. Another pause. This one was different from all the previous pauses. He looked at her the way you look at a door you have been walking past for years, when you finally notice it is not a wall. He looked away first. He set the document down. The schedule will be as follows, he said, and they spent the next hour covering logistics. He spoke. She listened. She asked questions when something was unclear. She did not ask questions when things were not unclear, even when another person might have asked them for the sake of filling space. She signed the preliminary agreement at the end of the hour in a clean, unhurried hand, her name followed by a small, deliberate period. She stood. She gathered the copy of the document he had indicated was for her reference. Lady Aldine, he said, as she moved toward the door. She turned. The Vethric, he said. Where did you learn it? She looked at him for a moment. I had a good teacher, she said. She opened the door and left. Oliver Creed, waiting in the corridor outside with the passive patience of a man who has spent decades waiting in corridors, noted that she walked back toward her rooms with the same pace she had used all day, and that she did not look pleased or displeased, or anything that could be easily described. She looked, he thought, like a person who has had a productive afternoon and is now thinking about what comes next. He went to report to the Duke. Well, the Duke said, before Oliver had a chance to speak. It was not a question. Oliver recognized it as the word the Duke used when he had already reached a conclusion and was giving it a moment of air before filing it. She signed the preliminary agreement, Oliver confirmed. Good. He paused. She is not what I expected. Your Grace? I expected ordinary. She is something else. Oliver waited, in case more was coming. Not extraordinary, the Duke said, and his voice carried the particular care of a man choosing words accurately, rather than poetically. Something else. Something I do not have a word for yet. Shall I look into her background more thoroughly? Later. He turned a page on his desk. She mentioned Vethric. Find out what you can without being obvious about it. Oliver nodded and left. In her rooms, Mara was already reading. The book with the red cover, which was not in fact something historical. It was a technical manual on Eastern trade routes, translated from Vethric into the common language, though she found the translation slightly inaccurate in the 3rd chapter, and had been making small notes in the margin. The palace settled around her in the afternoon quiet. Somewhere distant, she could hear the sound of the training yard, steel on steel, the controlled impact of practice. She read through it, the way she read through most sounds, without shutting it out, without being caught by it. She turned a page. She made a small note. She was, by every visible measure, entirely comfortable. Whether she was, in fact, entirely comfortable, was a question she had not asked herself. She had a system too, the same as the Duke, though she did not know that, and the systems were, In their essential shape, almost identical. You found the work in front of you. You did the work. You noted what was useful. You moved forward. The candle burned. The book turned. The palace was quiet and cold, and very old, and it had held many people in its history, most of them carrying things they did not advertise, and it was entirely accustomed to both the carrying and the silence. Outside the window of her room, the evening was coming in fast. The capital's sky turned colors in the last hour of light that the Western holdings never quite managed. Something to do with the height of the buildings, and the smoke from 10,000 chimneys, and the way the river on the south side of the city caught the last red and threw it back upward. Mara noticed it without marking it as remarkable. She simply noted, as she noted most things, that it was happening, and stored it alongside the other observations of the day. The Duke had looked at the door for a long moment. She had noted that too. Not with satisfaction, exactly. With the careful attention of someone who is tracking a situation and wants to understand it accurately, rather than pleasantly. She had agreed to this arrangement because it was practical for her family, and because she had known, before she agreed to it, that ordinary was not what she was, and that the Duke would discover this eventually, and she had decided that it was better to let it surface naturally than to manage its concealment. That was an exhausting way to begin something that was meant to last a considerable time. She had not, however, decided to tell him everything. There was a difference between letting a truth surface and handing it over. She closed her book. She ate the dinner Agnes sent up on a tray, which was better than she had expected. She washed her face. She went to bed at a sensible hour. She did not dream, or if she did not remember it. In the morning, she woke with the same thought she had gone to sleep with, which was that the third chapter of the Vethric Trade Manual was more significantly mistranslated than she had initially assessed, and that this had implications she would need to think through carefully. She dressed. She put on the plain gray cloak out of habit, and then took it off again, because she was indoors, and there was no need for it, and she left it folded on the chair by the window. She went down to breakfast. The Duke was not at breakfast. This was standard, Agnes had told her. He ate in his study on most mornings, which suited both of them perfectly well. She ate in the smaller dining room at the back of the house, where the morning light came in properly, and the table was the right size for one person to sit at, without feeling the absence of others. A young footman named George brought her tea without being asked, and looked approximately as if he would like to ask her a great many questions, and was restraining himself professionally. "George," she said, as he was leaving. He stopped. "My lady?" "The household library. Is it the one off the west corridor, or is there another one?" "There's the main library, my lady, that's off the west corridor, and then there's what we call the old library, which is on the second floor of the east wing. Most people don't use the old one. It's mostly maps and ledgers and the like." "Maps and ledgers," she said, as if this were the best news she had heard in some time. "Yes, my lady. Mostly Eastern Province records. Some of them are quite old." "Thank you, George." He left. She finished her tea. She went to find the old library, and she was still there, 3 hours later, when Oliver Creed came looking for her, with that morning's schedule, and found her standing at a large table covered in maps, the plain gray cloak nowhere in evidence, her hair slightly disordered from where she had leaned over something, cross-referencing a ledger against a map with the focused energy of a person who has found exactly what they were looking for and cannot quite believe their luck. Oliver stood in the doorway for a moment. She did not look up immediately. When she did, she said, "The eastern border as marked in this 1847 survey is wrong. Not slightly wrong. Meaningfully wrong. The river changed course after the floods of 1851, and no one updated the official boundary records." Oliver looked at the maps. He looked at her. He looked at the maps again. "There is an ongoing dispute," he said carefully, "about the eastern boundary near the Scheldt crossing." "Yes, I imagine there is. Because whoever is using the 1847 survey as their authority is going to have a very different view of where the boundary sits than anyone who went and looked at the actual river in the last 20 years. She straightened up. "Has the Duke seen these maps?" "I am not certain. Could you find out?" Oliver made a note. He was aware, standing in the doorway of the old library with its maps and its ledgers and its smell of old paper, that he was experiencing a slight revision of something he had assumed was settled. He had found the Duke a plain, quiet woman from a minor house, which was what had been asked for. He was not entirely sure anymore that that was what he had found. "The schedule for today," he said. "Of course." She moved back from the table, covering the maps carefully, without closing them, the way someone covers work they are coming back to. "What time?" "You have the afternoon free. There is a dinner this evening with 3 members of the Provincial Council. The Duke requests your presence." "I will be there," she said. She picked up the ledger she had been working with. "Oliver." He looked at her. "May I take this to my room to work through?" He looked at the ledger. It was the Eastern Province boundary record from 1847. It was not, technically, a document anyone had any reason to take to their room. "I will make a note," he said, which was not exactly a yes, and was not exactly a no, which was the answer he gave when he needed to think about something further before deciding. She accepted this without pressing it. She set the ledger down. She followed him back into the rest of the palace, and he noticed, going ahead of her, that she moved through the corridors of the house with the ease of someone who has already mapped the place in her head, which she must have, because she had only been here 2 days. He went to report to the Duke. The Duke listened to the report of the morning, without changing his expression. When Oliver reached the part about the boundary maps, he was quiet for longer than usual. "She found the 1847 survey," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." "In the old library." "She found the old library on her own. George directed her there. And she identified the river discrepancy. Within 3 hours." The Duke was still for a moment. "My father knew about the river. He kept it out of the official records deliberately, because he believed the dispute would be settled in the province's favor, without the documentation complicating things. It was not settled. It has been running for 11 years. I am aware, Your Grace. The council dinner tonight." He looked at the map on his own desk, a newer one, which also, now that he thought about it, possibly relied on the 1847 survey as its base. "She will be there, as you requested. I want to know where she sits in the conversation. Observe it. Of course." Oliver left. The Duke sat at his desk. He looked at his map. He looked at it for a long time, with the specific quality of attention a person gives to something they have been looking at for years, and are seeing for the first time as possibly, subtly, wrong. The council dinner was not, as council dinners went, a particularly difficult one. There were 3 men. Lord Edmund Farrow, who governed the northern quarter of the province and was 63 years old, and had the comfortable certainty of a man who has been right often enough that he has stopped checking whether he still is. Lord Henry Bassett, who was 47 and ran the grain assessment office with genuine competence and the social manner of someone who would rather be alone but understands the function of not being alone. And Lord Philip Crane, 29, newly appointed to the Southern Water Rights Committee, still arranging his face into what he believed the expression of a powerful man should look like. Mara sat to the Duke's right. She sat quietly through the first course. She ate. She listened. She did not speak unless spoken to, and she was not spoken to, because she was new, and because she was a woman, and because the men at the table had things to discuss, and were comfortable discussing them. Lord Farrow was explaining, at some length, why the current road maintenance system was producing suboptimal results. He had a view on this. He had several views on it. He enumerated them. The Duke listened with the focused patience of a man who has heard these views before, and is waiting to see if they have changed. Lord Bassett ate and said little, which was his pattern. Lord Crane asked 2 questions that were technically about road maintenance and practically about making himself heard. Mara had eaten her first course and was now holding her water glass in both hands and listening to Lord Farrow with the expression of a person who is genuinely tracking what is being said. The second course arrived. Lord Farrow finished his summary of road maintenance and moved, naturally, to the topic of the eastern boundary dispute, because road maintenance and boundary disputes were connected, because the roads near the Celt crossing had deteriorated, partly because neither side of the dispute claimed maintenance responsibility for them, and this had been the case for 11 years. Lord Bassett looked up from his plate for the first time. "The Celt question again," he said, with the tone of a man who would prefer to be discussing something solvable. "The Celt question," Lord Farrow agreed. "We have the 1847 documentation. It supports our position." The Eastern merchants have their own documents, none of which they will share, which suggests their documents do not support their position. Or, said a quiet voice, their documents show the same thing ours do, and neither position is being supported by them. The table turned. It was not a dramatic turn. It was the turn of people who are slightly surprised to realize someone has joined a conversation they had not included them in. Mara set her water glass down. "I am sorry," she said, without sounding particularly sorry. "I should not have interrupted." "No," the Duke said. His voice was entirely flat. "Please continue." She looked at Lord Pharaoh first, because it was his point she was engaging with, and it was polite to acknowledge that. The 1847 survey is the foundational document for both sides of this dispute. That is the problem. The survey itself is incorrect. The river moved in the floods of 1851. Neither side's claim is reliably established by the 1847 documentation, because the 1847 documentation describes a geography that has not existed for 70 years. Lord Pharaoh opened his mouth. "I am not suggesting the province's position is wrong," she said, before he could. "I am suggesting that arguing from a document that describes incorrect geography will not settle the dispute, because the Eastern merchants will always be able to say, correctly, that the document does not reflect the current situation. To win the argument, you need a new survey." The table was quiet. Lord Crane was looking at her the way young men sometimes look at women, who say things clearly in front of older men, with an expression that has not yet decided whether to be admiring or offended. Lord Bassett set down his fork. He looked at Lord Pharaoh. He looked at Mara. He said, "When was the last time anyone proposed a new survey?" 40 years ago, Lord Pharaoh said. He sounded as if he was saying it against his will. "It was voted down. The cost." "The cost of the survey versus the cost of 11 years of unresolved maintenance responsibility and ongoing dispute," Mara said. She had returned to her water glass. "I have not done the full calculation, but the shape of it seems clear." She stopped speaking. She had said what there was to say. She was not going to say it again, or elaborate it further to fill the space. Lord Bassett looked at the Duke. The Duke was looking at Mara, with the expression that was not the morning inventory expression, and was not the door you have been walking past for years expression. It was something else, a third expression, one Oliver Creed noted from his position near the wall with quiet attention. "We will table the boundary discussion," the Duke said. His voice was its usual even self. "I will have my office prepare a cost analysis of a new survey versus continued dispute overhead. We will revisit at the next session." Lord Pharaoh said, "Of course." He said it with the dignity of a man who has just been moved off a position he has held for a decade by someone who is not a member of his council, and who understands that his dignity requires him to receive this gracefully, or he will seem small. He was not a small man. He received it. Lord Crane asked, during the third course, where Mara was from, and she told him, and he said he had not heard much about the Western holdings, and she said they were quiet, and he said he imagined they must be, and the conversation ended there, with perfect comfort on both sides. After dinner, as the council members were taking their leave in the front hall, Lord Bassett paused beside the Duke for a moment and said, very quietly, "She is not what I expected." "No," the Duke said. "Is that a problem?" The Duke considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Not yet," he said. Lord Bassett nodded. He left. Mara was saying goodbye to Lord Pharaoh near the door, and Lord Pharaoh was being gracious about it in the way of a man who has decided to be gracious and means it, and she was accepting the graciousness without making a performance of receiving it. Oliver Creed reported to the Duke at 9 that evening. "She waited for the natural moment," he said. "She did not force her way into the conversation. She waited until Lord Pharaoh's argument created the opening, and then she took it." "I know," the Duke said. He was at his desk. He was not, for once, actually working. He was holding a pen but had not used it for several minutes. Bassett liked her. "Bassett likes accuracy," Oliver said. "He does not like people who are wrong with confidence." She was accurate, and she was not particularly confident about being accurate. She said what she knew, and stopped. "The boundary survey." "Yes. Have my office begin the cost analysis." He turned the pen over in his hand. "What do we know about the Aldine family's history? Further back. Further than I asked before." Oliver was quiet for a moment. "There are some gaps in the record, Your Grace. As I mentioned initially, the family does not make much noise. The gaps. They are principally in the period 40 to 60 years ago. Before that, the family is documented reasonably well. After that, much less so." The Duke looked at the pen. 40 to 60 years ago. Yes. He set the pen down. "Look into it," he said, carefully. Of course. After Oliver left, the Duke sat for a long time at his desk without working. The fire in the grate burned down. He did not add wood to it. He sat in the gradual cooling of the room and thought about a woman who had found the old library in 2 days, and the error in a 70-year-old map in 3 hours, and had waited, patiently, for the right moment, in a conversation, before she said the thing that changed the shape of it. He thought about the Vethric language, which was not easy, and which was not common, and which had not been common for at least 2 generations because the people who spoke it natively had, at that point 2 generations ago, largely ceased to exist as a distinct political group. He thought about the small box she had placed on her table. He had not been near her rooms. He had not seen the box. But Agnes mentioned things to Oliver, and Oliver mentioned things to him, usually framed as household logistics, and the small box had been mentioned as a detail, a woman who packed a locked box and placed it on her table without opening it. People locked things they were protecting. People protected things that mattered. What mattered to Mara Aldine, third daughter of a minor house in the Western Holdings, was not immediately obvious. She ate simply. She dressed simply. She wore a plain gray cloak. She did not speak to be heard. She did not arrive in rooms expecting to be noticed. And yet she had found the error in the boundary map, and she spoke Vethric, and she had waited at the dinner table, like a hunter waits, with patience and precision, for the moment when speech would do something rather than simply make noise. He thought about these things until the fire was fully out and the room was cold. Then he went to bed. He did not sleep immediately, which was not unusual for him. He lay in the dark of his room, which was large and correctly furnished and entirely impersonal in the way of rooms where the person who occupies them has decided to give the room nothing of themselves, and he listened to the palace settle. Somewhere in the east wing, a window was open slightly. He could tell by the particular sound the draft made in the upper corridor. Someone had opened a window in cold weather, which meant someone was awake and had wanted air. He calculated the rooms. The east wing, upper level, those were the guest rooms, Mara's rooms. She was awake. He looked at the ceiling of his room. He thought about plain gray cloaks and Vethric translations and boundary maps. Then he did what he had learned to do over 3 years when his mind was doing something unhelpful. He named 5 objects in the room from where he was lying, 5 specific objects, and gave each one its precise name. The left post of the bed frame, the lamp on the table, the edge of the window curtain, the chair by the door, the stack of papers on the chest. He counted his breath in and his breath out. He went to sleep. In the east wing, Mara closed the window she had opened for 20 minutes to clear the staleness from the room. She had not been doing anything particularly awake at 2 in the morning. She had simply been awake, which happens sometimes, and had found that cold air through a window for 20 minutes was a reliable solution. She went back to bed. She slept with the practical thoroughness of a person who regards sleep as one more task to be done properly. In the morning, she found George and asked him where she could request books to be brought up from the town library. He told her. She sent a list of 6 titles, all of them Eastern Province history, one of them a geological survey from 1852, the year after the Great Floods. She went back to her maps. She was making a drawing, a careful sketch of where the river would have been after it changed course, based on the geological patterns she had read about and the 1847 survey's original measurements, and what she understood about how water moved through flat land when given the chance to move freely. It was not the work anyone had assigned her. It was the work she could see needed doing. She had always had trouble distinguishing between those two things. 3 days after the council dinner, Agnes found her in the kitchen. Not eating, not watching. Standing beside the head cook, a woman named Dora who had been cooking for the palace household for 15 years, and who was not accustomed to guests in her kitchen, reviewing the household supply ledger with the focused attention of someone checking numbers. Agnes stood in the kitchen doorway and observed this for a moment. She found the error herself, Dora said, before Agnes could speak. Dora did not look up from her work. Told me we have been paying 14% above market rate for dried goods from the Selt merchant for 3 years. Said the rate was set at a time when the road tariffs were higher, and nobody updated the contract when the tariffs changed. Agnes looked at Mara. Mara set the ledger back on the counter. I am sorry to interfere with your morning, Dora. I was looking for something to read with breakfast and wandered further than I intended. Dora made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite acknowledgement. I have worked in 3 noble houses, she said. No one has ever wandered into my kitchen to read the supply ledger. I find numbers interesting, Mara said. She went back to the smaller dining room and her breakfast without further explanation. Agnes stood in the kitchen and looked at the supply ledger. 14%, Dora said. I heard you, Agnes said. She went to find Oliver Creed. Oliver went to find the Duke. The Duke, at this point, had begun a practice that he had not named to himself, but which consisted of choosing the route through the palace that took him past the window on the second-floor corridor of the east wing that looked into the old library courtyard. He told himself this was because the longer route past the east wing added an appropriate amount of walking to his morning, which a man of his age and indoor occupation required for his health. He did not think about the fact that he had not taken this longer route before 3 weeks ago. He passed the window. He did not look into the courtyard. He continued to his study. The supply contract, Oliver said, presenting the information. The Duke read the ledger note Agnes had brought up. He read the calculation Mara had made in the margin, clean figures in a clear hand. He read the reference to the tariff change date, which was correctly identified to the month. When was the contract last reviewed? He asked. 3 years ago, Oliver said. And no one caught the tariff discrepancy. No, Your Grace. The Duke set the ledger down. He did not say anything for a moment. He was thinking about the boundary maps and the Vethric and the council dinner, and now this. A woman who had wandered into the kitchen with a supply ledger and found in 20 minutes what 3 years of quarterly reviews had not found. She is not looking for these things, he said. It was not a question. He was thinking out loud in the specific, careful way he thought out loud only when Oliver was in the room, and only when something required being said before it could be understood. It does not appear so, Oliver agreed. She is simply reading whatever is in front of her. It appears so. And whatever is in front of her, she understands. Oliver was quiet. The Duke looked at the window. The morning light was gray and flat. The background inquiry, how far have you gotten? I have found a reference, Oliver said. His voice had a quality it did not usually have, a carefulness that was different from his ordinary carefulness. In the historical records, not the provincial records, the central archive. Tell me. The Aldine name, as it currently exists, was adopted. Approximately 60 years ago, it replaced an older family name. The record of the replacement is documented, formally, but the reason given is described only as change of circumstances. Oliver paused. The original name is referenced in a note attached to the file, a note that appears to have been added later by a different hand. The note is partially obscured. The Duke turned from the window. What can you read of it? 2 words, Oliver said. Clearly legible. The rest is damaged. He opened the small notebook. He read the 2 words. The Duke stood very still. The room was quiet. Outside, the training yard was beginning its morning activity. Steel rang on steel, faint through the closed window. You are certain, the Duke said. The handwriting matches the central archivist's record from that period. Yes. I had a document examiner verify it. The Duke looked at his desk. He looked at the ledger, with Mara's clean margin calculations. He looked at Oliver. Does she know what you have found? He said. I have told no one else, Oliver said. I came directly to you. Good. His voice was very careful now. It had always been careful, but this was a different calibration. The kind of careful that means something large is being held in place. Keep it that way, for now. Of course, Your Grace. The supply contract. Have the finance office contact the Selt merchant and renegotiate. Backdate the corrected rate, 3 years, and apply the difference as a credit. He paused. Tell Agnes that Lady Aldine's access to the household records is unrestricted. Oliver made a note. He hesitated, which was unusual for him. Your Grace. Yes. The inquiry. Would you like me to continue it? The Duke looked at the two words in Oliver's notebook. He knew them. Everyone of his generation knew them. Everyone of his generation had assumed they belonged only to history. Yes, he said, but quietly, very quietly. Oliver left. The Duke stood at his desk for a long time. He thought about a woman who had arrived in a plain gray cloak and sat in a formal audience without being nervous, and asked about the Vethric delegations on the first day, and found the boundary map error and the supply contract discrepancy, and had not said, at any point, anything that suggested she understood the significance of any of it. Or had chosen not to say it. There was a difference. He was not yet sure which one it was. He picked up the ledger. He read her margin calculation again. The handwriting was the same as the betrothal agreement signature. Clean, deliberate, slightly formal. The hand of someone who had been carefully taught. He thought about who, in the Western holdings, in a minor house, would have had access to careful teachers. He thought about the locked box on the table in the East Wing. He set the ledger down. He did his morning's work with more difficulty than usual, which was to say he did it with difficulty, which was not something that normally happened. By noon he had made a decision. He sent a message to Mara's rooms, through Agnes, asking if she would walk with him in the East Gardens that afternoon. Not a formal request, the kind you sent when you wanted the answer to be yes, and were leaving space for it to be no. Agnes brought the reply in 20 minutes. The reply was yes. The East Gardens in late autumn were not a comfortable place to walk. The trees had shed most of their leaves, and the paths were covered in the brown remains of them, softened by recent rain, into something that was almost quiet underfoot. The formal hedges had been cut for the season, and stood in their geometric shapes like furniture that has been cleared to the edges of a room. The fountain in the center of the main path had been covered with a wooden cap for winter, and it sat there, a blunt wooden circle where water had been, not decorative and not functional and not particularly anything. Mara wore her plain gray cloak. The hood was up, because they were outdoors and the air was cold. She walked beside the Duke at a pace that matched his, without requiring adjustment, which he noticed, because he normally walked faster than people beside him, and normally had to moderate himself. He did not have to moderate himself. They walked for a while without speaking. He had not prepared anything to say. He had sent the message without preparing anything, because he had found, in the past 3 weeks, that prepared things did not particularly apply to this situation, and he might as well admit that. Oliver tells me you found the kitchen ledger, he said eventually. I was looking for something to read, she said. In the kitchen. I followed the corridor. I was not paying attention. She paused. I should have asked, before reviewing household accounts. I apologize for the intrusion. Agnes has been told your access is unrestricted. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her receive this information from the corner of his vision, which was where he was watching most things at the moment, from corners, from angles, not directly. That is generous, she said. It is practical. He stopped at the covered fountain. He looked at the wooden cap. The boundary survey. Yes. The cost analysis came back this morning. A new survey costs less than 18 months of continued dispute maintenance. I thought it might be close to that. It is less, by a significant margin. She looked at the covered fountain. Then the decision seems clear. It does. It will not feel clear to Lord Pharaoh, who has argued the 1847 position for 11 years. Positions held for 11 years do not feel like errors when they are identified as such. They feel like attacks. I know, she said. That is why you need to show him the geological records first. Let him reach the conclusion himself. If the evidence leads him there, it is his conclusion, not yours. He looked at her. She was looking at the fountain cap. Her profile in the gray afternoon light was calm and attentive, the face of a person who is thinking and does not mind you watching them think. How old were you when you decided that was true? He said. She looked at him then. It was the first time in the conversation she had looked at him directly, rather than at the things they were both looking at. I did not decide it was true. I observed it being true, repeatedly, and stopped arguing with it. When? Something moved in her face, not emotion exactly, the adjustment of someone who is choosing how much to give. I was 12, she said. There was a disagreement between two older men about the best route for the harvest carts. My father had the correct answer. I had already worked it out. I told the man who was wrong that he was wrong, with all the evidence. She looked back at the fountain. He was not persuaded. He was offended. We lost the harvest argument and 3 years of goodwill with a neighboring family. And you learned to wait. I learned to build a path to the correct conclusion, rather than present the conclusion and expect someone to walk to it alone. He was quiet for a moment. Is that what you were doing at the council dinner? I was saying what was accurate, she said. Lord Pharaoh was saying something that was not. That is a narrow space to work in. You worked in it well. She did not acknowledge the compliment. He noted this. He had offered several things in the conversation that could have been received as compliments, and she had received none of them as such. Not out of rudeness, out of a preference for moving past them. There is something I want to ask you, he said. She waited. The Vethric language, where specifically did you learn it? This was a different question from the one he had asked before, which had been, where did you learn it? General, casual, end of a conversation. This was specific. It carried weight. She heard the weight. He could tell by the small pause before she answered, not hesitation, calculation. From a woman who lived in the village nearest our holding, she said. For 7 years, until I was 17, she taught me languages. She had several. Vethric, Old Celtine, and the Eastern Coastal dialect, which is almost gone now. She paused. She died when I was 17. I continued practicing what she had given me, because it seemed wasteful not to. Who was she? She said her name was Margot. Mara's voice was even and clear. I believed her. I was 7. The unspoken part of this, which they both understood, was that she had not necessarily continued to believe it as she grew older, and had chosen to let Margot keep her name regardless. The Duke turned away from the fountain. They walked again. The woman who taught you, he said, did she teach you anything else besides languages? History, Mara said. Eastern Province history in particular. Trade routes, the census records from the old territories. She found it interesting, and I found it interesting because she did. Eastern Province history. Yes. He walked beside her in the cold afternoon air, through the stripped-down gardens, past the geometric hedges. Mara, he said. It was the first time he had used her name without the lady in front of it. She did not comment on this. Yes, she said. There is something I need to tell you, and after I tell you, I need you to tell me something in return. She slowed her pace slightly, not stopping, just giving the conversation room to have weight. The Central Archive, he said. Oliver has found a record, a name change, 60 years ago. The Aldine name was adopted from another name. He paused. The original name is partially obscured, but 2 words are legible. Silence. The garden. The cold air. Her breath, visible for a moment in the cold, moving steadily. What 2 words? She said. He told her. She was quiet for a long time. They had reached the far edge of the garden, where the formal path ended and the rough ground of the winter kitchen garden began. She stood at the edge of the path and looked at the bare brown rows of the kitchen garden with the complete, still attention of a person who is holding very many things very carefully. You knew, he said. It was not an accusation. He was not angry. He was precise. She did not confirm or deny it immediately. She took a breath. I knew the name, she said at last. I knew it had been changed. My mother told me when I was 15, and told me never to repeat it, and told me that the change had been made so that her daughters could live safely and marry, and not carry a name that some people, even 2 generations later, would regard as a political threat rather than a family history. He was looking at her profile. I was not hiding it from you, she said. I was honoring my mother's instruction and waiting to see whether you would find it yourself. And when I did, then we would have this conversation, she said, which we are having. He was quiet for a long time. The locked box on your table, he said. She turned and looked at him, fully, directly. Her eyes were gray in the gray light of the afternoon, and they were steady in the way of things that have been steadied by practice. It contains a small portrait, she said, my mother's. Of her mother. Who was her mother's mother before that? She paused. There is a name written on the back of it in old script. My mother showed it to me once. She has not opened the box since she gave it to me." The Duke looked at her. Mara al-Din stood at the edge of the winter kitchen garden, in a plain gray cloak, and looked back at him with the expression of a person who has said what is true and is not going to manage how it lands. "I did not marry you for your name," he said. He meant the general version of you, the family, the house, the history. He was aware, saying it, that it was more complicated than that now. "I know," she said. "That is partly why I agreed to come." He thought about this. He thought about a woman who had decided that the safest version of a man was one who wanted nothing remarkable, because a man who wanted nothing remarkable would not, when he found remarkable, feel the need to use it. He thought about how correct this analysis was. He thought about how uncomfortable it was to be seen clearly by someone who had no particular interest in making you feel comfortable. "The betrothal ceremony is in 3 weeks, he said. "Yes. Is there anything else I should know before then?" She thought about it honestly. "I am a faster reader than most people expect, and a slower speaker than most people prefer. I do not like large gatherings, and I am not very good at pretending to. And I have very specific opinions about architectural drainage that most people find tedious, but which are extremely relevant to why the North Corridor floods every February." He looked at her. "The North Corridor floods every February?" he said. "For at least 12 years, based on the household maintenance logs, the downspout configuration on the north face is directing water into the foundation rather than away from it. It would cost very little to correct." He thought about the North Corridor flooding every February for 12 years. "I will have Oliver look into it," he said. "The third log from the east is the relevant one," she said. "I left a note." He looked at her for a moment. She was looking back at the gardens, the stripped trees, the cold formal shapes of the winter hedges. "Mara," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "For what, precisely?" He did not specify. "The name, the note, the 12 years of drainage information, all of it." She nodded. They walked back to the palace through the cold afternoon, and neither of them spoke, and it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have agreed on something without deciding to agree, which is the best kind of agreement and the most durable. That evening, Agnes knocked on Mara's door and delivered, without commentary, the third maintenance log from the east drainage stack. Mara read it. She had already read it once, but she read it again, because the situation had changed, and second readings with changed situations yielded new information. She turned the pages with the same patient attention she gave to everything, and she made 3 additional notes in the margins that she had not made the first time. At the bottom of the final page, there was a small annotation in someone else's handwriting. Not her note. A note that had been there already, that she had read before and not fully understood. She read it again now. It was 12 words. It said, "North wall, 3rd stone from the west arch, tap twice and push." She looked at this for a moment. Then she got up, put on her plain gray cloak, and went to the North Corridor. The palace at night was quiet in a different way from the palace in the day. It was not empty. There were night staff, guards at specific posts, the occasional sleepless person moving through the back corridors with a candle. But the main corridors were largely unoccupied, and the North Corridor at this hour was completely unoccupied, which was probably why it had been allowed to flood every February for 12 years without anyone doing very much about it. The North Corridor was old. It was one of the original building's corridors, from before the palace had been expanded twice in each direction. The stones here were different from the stones in the rest of the building, larger and darker, and fitted together with the particular care of a period when building meant building rather than constructing. The walls had a specific smell, damp and mineral and old, the smell of stones that have stood in the same place for 200 years. She counted from the west arch. 3rd stone. She looked at it. It was identical to every other stone. She tapped twice and pushed. The stone did not move immediately. She pushed harder. It moved. Not outward. Sideways, on a pivot, revealing a space behind it, approximately the size of a small document box. Inside the space, sitting in a layer of dust that suggested it had not been opened for a very long time, was a leather-bound book. She reached in and took it. She did not open it in the corridor. She brought it back to her room. She sat at the table by the window, pushed the small locked box to one side, and opened the leather book under her candle. The handwriting inside was old, a generation old, perhaps more. The ink had faded to the particular brown that meant it had been written with good quality ink a long time ago. The pages were dry, which meant the hiding place had stayed sealed. She read for an hour. What she read was a set of private accounts, not financial accounts, personal ones, written by someone who had no intention of them being found, which was why they had been hidden in a wall. They were accounts of a period of political upheaval, the kind that does not make it into formal records because the people who write formal records are the people who survived the upheaval and have an interest in the narrative. The author of the accounts was not named. There were references to a child, referred to only as the small one. There were references to a journey west, to a family that had offered shelter. There were references to a name being changed and the original being buried, with someone called simply the grandmother. Mara turned the last page. She sat in the candlelight for a long time. She had known the outline of this history. Margot had told her what she could, and her mother had told her what she knew, and between them she had assembled a picture that was mostly correct in its shapes, if not all of its details. She had not known about the book. She had not known the route of the original journey, the family that had offered shelter, the price that had been paid for the name change, and the silence that followed it. She sat with the book in her hands and thought about her mother, who had given her the locked box and the portrait, and who had never mentioned a book in the north wall. Maybe she had not known. Maybe Margot had not told her, had only left the annotation in the maintenance log for someone who would eventually read carefully enough to find it. Mara had always read carefully. She thought about the Duke, walking beside her in the winter garden, saying the two words from the archive with the careful voice of someone holding something large. She thought about the fact that she had answered him honestly, and he had said thank you. She put the book on the table beside the locked box. She sat for a while with both of them in front of her, one locked and one open, the new and the very old, and the candle burning steadily between them. Then she did the thing she always did when something was large and required time. She made a list. Not a list of feelings, a list of facts, what she knew, what she did not know, what could be established, what could not. She wrote it in small, clear handwriting on a fresh page of the notebook she kept on the table. It took 15 minutes. When she was done, she looked at what she had written and understood, clearly and practically, what the next week was going to require of her. She was not afraid of it. She had been trained, by a woman named Margot who had probably never been named Margot, for something. She had not known the exact shape of that something. She was beginning to understand it now. She blew out the candle. She lay down. She looked at the dark ceiling for a few minutes. She slept. In the morning she was at the old library by 7, and the drainage log was back in its place on the shelf, and the leather book was in the locked box beside the portrait, and the only evidence that anything had happened was the addition of 3 new annotations in the maintenance log's margins, and those were just about the drainage. George brought her tea at 7:30, without being asked. He was getting very good at this. She drank it. She turned a page. Outside, the training yard rang with its morning work, and the palace woke around her, with all the sounds of a large house doing its necessary things, and she sat among the old maps and the old records, and read with the focused, unhurried attention of a woman who has decided, for better or worse, that this is where she is going to be, and has made her peace with what that means. Whether the peace was real, or whether it was, like so many necessary things, a kind of practiced quiet that serves the same function, was not something she spent time examining. She was practical. Practical was enough. For now. The Eastern delegation arrived without prior notice. This was not unusual for Vethric merchants, Oliver Creed explained to the Duke, on the morning of their arrival, with the slightly worn expression of a man delivering information that has not improved with repetition. The Vethric trading companies regarded formal scheduling as an insult to the spontaneity of commercial opportunity. They arrived when they had arrived. They expected to be received, because they were important, and they were important because they were correct that they were important. How many? The Duke asked. 7. 3 principals, 3 support staff, and an elder who has not been introduced. The elder is the one I would pay attention to. How long have we had a functioning interpreter? Oliver's expression did not change, but there was a quality behind it that suggested he would have liked it to. Our last qualified Vethric interpreter is currently in the Eastern Coastal Territory handling the grain renegotiation. He is 6 days' ride away. And the backup? There is no backup, Your Grace. Vethric is not commonly taught. We have made do, in the past, with a combination of old Celtine, hand signals, and a great deal of patience on both sides. The Duke stood at his study window looking at the courtyard, where the Vethric delegation was being housed in the guest quarters. He could see the elder from here, standing in the courtyard with the patience of a man who has spent a long life waiting for things that matter, and has consequently developed a very accurate sense of what matters. "Where is she?" he said. Oliver did not ask who he meant. "The old library. George took her breakfast there." "Tell her about the delegation." "Shall I explain that we have no interpreter?" "Yes." "Shall I ask her if she is willing to help?" "No," the Duke said. He turned from the window. "Tell her about the situation. She will make her own decision." Oliver went to the old library. He knocked once and entered, because the door was already slightly open, which was the old library's usual state when Mara was working in it. She had a system, she had explained to George, whereby a slightly open door meant she was available, and a fully closed door meant she was mid-argument with something complicated and would prefer not to be interrupted. The door was slightly open. She was at the large table. 3 maps were open, 2 of them weighted down at their corners, with small rocks she had apparently carried in from the garden for this purpose. She was making a drawing of what appeared to be a revised river course. Oliver stood in the doorway and explained the situation. She listened without looking up from the drawing. When he had finished, she set down her pencil, aligned the ruler she had been using so it lay exactly along the edge of the nearest map, and said, "Is the elder the one who is not speaking to anyone?" "He is the one standing in the courtyard, yes." "Then it is a formal inquiry. If it were an informal one, he would be moving through the space, looking at things. He is not. He is planted in the center of it, and waiting to be addressed." She pushed back from the table. "When do they wish to begin?" "The Duke would like to know if you are willing to." "Yes," she said. "When?" "Whenever is convenient for you." She looked at her maps for a moment. "I need to finish this line or I will lose the angle." She picked up the pencil. She finished the line. She set the pencil down. She stood. "Now." Oliver led her downstairs. In the corridor outside the main receiving room, he paused. "I should tell you," he said, "that the last Vethric delegation, 3 years ago, was difficult. They wished to renegotiate a trade route that would have added 7 weeks to our Eastern delivery schedule. The Duke declined. They left unhappy." "I know," she said. "I read the record." Oliver looked at her. "You read the delegation records?" "I found them in the second cabinet in the old library. They are filed under M, for merchants, which took me a moment, because the rest of the filing system uses proper subject headings." She paused. "Was there anything specific about this delegation you wanted me to know before I go in?" "The elder," Oliver said. "He has a reputation for testing people, posing situations. He is assessing whether you are worth his principal's time." "What kind of situations?" "Philosophical ones, mostly. Historical ones. He is interested in whether his counterpart understands the context they are negotiating in." She absorbed this with the same expression she gave to all information. "Is there anything else?" "The Duke will be present. He wishes to observe." "Of course," she said, and went through the door. The receiving room was the formal one, the large one, with the high ceiling, and the good chairs, arranged to suggest both comfort and the seriousness of the occasion. The 3 principals of the Vethric delegation were seated. The elder was not seated. He was standing at the window, looking out at the courtyard he had been standing in an hour before, which was either a coincidence or a statement. The Duke was seated at the head of the arrangement, in a chair that was not quite a throne but performed some of the same functions. He looked up when she came in. He did not signal anything with his face. She did not require a signal. She crossed the room and stopped at the appropriate distance from the elder, who had not turned from the window. She said 3 words in Vethric. The elder turned. He was old, not the kind of old that is frail but the kind that is dense, compacted by time into something that occupies less space than it once did, and weighs more for it. His face had the quality of good leather that has been in the weather for a long time. He looked at her with eyes that were still and assessing, and entirely without hurry. He said something in Vethric. She replied. He said something else. Longer this time, and from the cadence of it, something with a double meaning, the kind of thing you said to someone to see if they were listening at the surface, or listening all the way down. She replied with something that made one of the seated principals look at the elder. The elder was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the smile of a man who has asked a question he expects to stump people, and has not been stumped, and who is deciding how he feels about that. He crossed to the seating arrangement. He sat. He addressed the Duke directly, in Vethric, and paused for Mara to translate. He says, Mara said to the Duke, in a perfectly neutral voice, that he is pleased to negotiate with a house that takes language seriously. He says that the last time he visited, the interpreter assigned to your house translated his senior principal's name incorrectly for 3 days, and the principal chose not to correct it, which the principal regards as his own most significant diplomatic failure. She paused. He is saying this as a compliment to the current arrangement. The Duke looked at her. She looked back at him without expression. Tell him, the Duke said, that we are pleased to welcome him, and that we hope the current arrangement proves more satisfactory to all parties. She turned to the elder and spoke. The elder replied. He says, Mara translated, that he will know within the first hour whether it is more satisfactory. He has several questions he wishes to ask before the formal discussion begins. He asks whether you object to the questions. No objection, the Duke said. The elder's first question was about the history of the eastern trade route before the current tariff structure. It was a specific question, referring to a particular decade, a particular shift in the route's commercial viability. The Duke looked at Oliver, who made a note, and then at Mara, who said, before Oliver had finished making the note, the 1820s route shift was caused by the collapse of the Seltvale Bridge, which remained unrepaired for 11 years because of the same boundary dispute the province is currently managing. The trade moved inland to avoid the crossing, and the inland route became standard, despite being 4 days longer. The elder is asking whether the current negotiations understand this history, because the proposal his principals carry is related to the original coastal route. Silence. Oliver looked at his notebook, the note he had not finished making. The Duke looked at Mara. She was looking at the elder, who was looking at her with the contained, assessing quality of a man who has been given an accurate answer and is recalibrating how much patience he is going to need for the next 2 hours. Not much, apparently. He had a great deal of patience and had now recalibrated to needing very little of it. Ask him, the Duke said slowly, about the coastal route proposal. She asked. The elder answered. For the next 40 minutes, the negotiation moved through the room in 2 languages, Mara sitting slightly to the Duke's left, translating with the same quality she brought to all her activities, accurately, at the minimum necessary speed, without adding anything that had not been said, or softening anything that was meant to have an edge. The senior principal said something, at one point, that was meant to have a significant edge. Mara translated it exactly. The Duke received the edge without blinking, and replied with the kind of measured response that was not a counter-edge, but was not a retreat either, and Mara translated that exactly too. The elder watched this exchange. Then he said something, and this time it was addressed to Mara directly, not through her as a translator, at her as a participant. She replied, also directly, also as a participant. What did he say? The Duke asked quietly. He said that most translators tell him what the speaker means, she said, equally quietly. He asked if I always translate what the speaker says. And you said? I said that I translate what the speaker says, because what people mean is frequently their own business, and frequently different from what they say. And if he wants me to translate what the speakers mean, rather than what they say, I will need a clarification of whether he wants their private intent or their diplomatic intent, because in his principal's last statement, those were 3 different things. The Duke was quiet for a moment. What did he reply? He said that was the most interesting answer anyone had given him in 11 years of delegation work, she said, and that he would like to discuss the coastal route in detail. They discussed the coastal route in detail. By the time the first session ended, 2 hours later, the essential framework of a preliminary agreement had been sketched, not concluded. Vethric merchants did not conclude things in the first session, Oliver had said, and he was right, they did not. But the sketch existed, and it was workable, and the elder had at one point said something to the principal that Mara did not translate, and the Duke did not ask about. After the delegation had been escorted to refresh themselves before the evening meal, the Duke stood with Oliver in the cleared receiving room and did not immediately speak. Oliver waited. The 1820 route shift, the Duke said. The Seltvale Bridge. The inland route. Yes, Your Grace. Is that in our records? I will check, Oliver said, which meant he was fairly sure it was not, at least not in the accessible records, and that it would turn out to be in the old library's second cabinet, somewhere. The coastal route proposal, the Duke said. If it is what I think it is, it resolves the eastern delivery problem by 6 weeks. At minimum, Oliver said. We lost that option 11 years ago, because the boundary dispute closed the crossing. Yes. And if the boundary dispute is resolved with the new survey, the crossing becomes available, Oliver said. The Duke turned and looked at the chair where Mara had been sitting. She was gone. She had left when the delegation left, efficiently, without ceremony. She knew, the Duke said, not with accusation. With the specific quality of someone assembling a picture, they have been building piece by piece, and are now seeing the whole of it. She read the delegation records, Oliver said. She read the delegation records, she read the maintenance logs, she read the Eastern trade history, she found the boundary map error, and she sat down with a Vethric trading elder and his team, and negotiated a preliminary agreement that connects all of those things into a coherent outcome. He was quiet. In one afternoon. It appears so, Your Grace. The Duke walked to the window. He looked out at the courtyard where the Vethric elder had been standing, planted in the center of the space, waiting. Oliver, he said. Yes. The background inquiry, what have you found today? Nothing new since our last discussion, Oliver said. The archive records are as I described. The name, the change, the note. The name, the Duke said, if it were known. Not by us. By others, by someone who was looking. Oliver understood what was being asked. He considered it carefully. It would be politically significant, he said. It would be significant in a way that some people would regard as threatening, and some people would regard as an opportunity. Which people would regard it as threatening? Oliver met his eyes. People who have a claim that such a name would complicate. And which people would regard it as an opportunity? People who have a negotiation that such a name would legitimize. They looked at each other. The Eastern Territories, the Duke said. Yes, Oliver said. Which I have been attempting to legitimize for 6 years. Yes, Your Grace. The Duke was still. Outside, the courtyard was empty now, the Vethric delegation within, the late afternoon light falling on the clean stones at an angle. Creed, he said. Your Grace. Who else is looking? Oliver was quiet for a moment. Lady Sarret has made 3 inquiries to the Central Archive in the past 2 weeks. The archivist is a careful man, but he is not without pressures, and Lady Sarret has been at this court for 20 years. The Duke turned from the window. How long do we have? He said. Before she has what we have. Before she has enough to move. Oliver considered. A week, he said. Perhaps less. Then we have a week, the Duke said. He went to find Mara. She was not in the old library. She was not in her rooms. Agnes, when asked, said she had last seen her heading toward the north corridor, with the maintenance log under her arm, which meant she was inspecting the drainage problem, which was probably not urgent today, but which was the kind of problem she would have on her list and would be working through in the correct order. He found her in the north corridor, crouched beside the base of the wall, looking at the stone at floor level, with a small lamp she had apparently retrieved from somewhere. She did not hear him coming, because she was focused, and when he stopped in the corridor a few feet behind her, she did not startle, which told him she had been aware of him long enough to have already decided not to startle. The third stone from the west arch, she said, without turning. Someone has been in here, recently enough that the dust is disturbed. He was very still. The dust pattern suggests they reached in, she continued. Whatever was in there is not in there anymore. It was taken out, or it was never put back. She stood and turned, and when she saw his face, she adjusted something in her own. You already knew. No, he said. I knew someone found something, in the wall of this corridor, a long time ago. I did not know it was here. She looked at him. The annotation in the maintenance log. I did not read it, he said. I only heard you had annotated it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Someone hid a book here, a long time ago. I found it last night. I know, he said. She registered this, you know. The wall cavity is in the original palace records. It was built deliberately, as a document storage space, during the palace's first period of construction. It appears in the records under a different name now. A storage feature. He looked at the wall. Who hid something there would have needed to know the original records. Someone who had read the original records, she said, and they both understood who that was. Mara looked at the wall. She looked at him. Her expression was the expression she wore when she was adding new information to an existing picture and seeing what changed in the picture. The book is in my room, she said. It was hidden by someone who was protecting a record, a personal account. It covers a period of approximately 18 months, 61 years ago. The period of the family separation, he said. Yes, he breathed. There is a situation, he said, that I need you to understand. Lady Sarat, she said. He looked at her. She has been watching me since the first audience, Mara said. She looked at me, the way someone looks when they are not seeing what they were told to expect, and they are trying to decide what they are actually seeing. I recognized it, because I do it myself. She paused. She is going to the archive. She already has been, 3 times. Mara turned and leaned against the wall of the corridor, arms folded, looking at the opposite wall rather than at him. This was her thinking posture, he had come to understand. She was not avoiding him. She was simply giving her eyes something simple to rest on, while the complicated part happened in her head. What does she want from it? Mara asked. Information that could disrupt the betrothal. To disrupt it, or to use it? She looked at him. Those are different. If she wants to disrupt the match, she will take the name to the court and make it a scandal. If she wants to use it, she will take it to you privately and offer to manage the disclosure. He considered this. I had assumed the former. She has been at this court for 20 years, Mara said. She did not survive 20 years in a court by doing things that could be traced back to her as destabilizing. She is careful. The most useful thing the information could be to her is leverage, not chaos. And what is she leveraging for? Mara was quiet for a moment. What does she want that she does not have? He thought about Vene Sarat, her 20 years, her careful, elegant face, her 3 missed matches, her network of information. Influence, he said. Official influence. She has social influence, and she has the influence of information. She does not have a formal position. Then she is going to come to you, Mara said. She is going to tell you she has discovered something sensitive, and she is going to ask what it is worth to you for that information to be managed carefully. She paused. The question is how quickly. Oliver estimates less than a week. She nodded slowly. She looked at the wall cavity again. What she does not know, she said, is that you already know. Yes. And she does not know that you know I know. No. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had the particular clarity it got when she had worked through something to a conclusion she trusted. Then the situation is this. She arrives with information that is not, to her knowledge, known to you. She expects to have leverage. If you tell her you already have the information, the leverage dissolves and she has nothing to offer you, and she has exposed her intent. She will not want that. No, he said. But if she believes she has leverage she does not actually have, she will use it incorrectly, Mara said. She will make a move based on a false picture of the situation, and that is a mistake she cannot recover from easily. He looked at her. You are suggesting I let her come. I am suggesting you let her come, and let her say what she is going to say, and let her believe the leverage is real. Mara paused, and then be very clear that it is not. And the name? When it becomes public? She looked at him, with the direct, steady gaze she used when she was saying something that required being said without softening. It will become public eventually. It always does. The question is whether it becomes public as a scandal because someone used it as a weapon, or whether it becomes public as a matter of record because you chose when and how to address it. When would you choose? He said. After the betrothal, she said. After the survey is commissioned. After the Vethric agreement is formalized. After the Eastern legitimization process has something to anchor to. She paused. At that point, the name is not a threat to anything. It is evidence of continuity. It is history that explains why the current arrangement is not just a convenient match, but a meaningful one. He was looking at her, in the half-light of the North Corridor. She looked back with the composed, particular quality that he had been trying to find a word for since the first morning he had walked past her window and noticed the light was still on. He had a word for it now. It was not remarkable, the word he had used before. It was not the word his steward had used, or the word the court would use if they could see her standing in the North Corridor, in a plain gray cloak, working out the exact sequence of a political situation with the same focused, practical attention she gave to boundary maps and supply contracts and kitchen ledgers. The word was capable. Profoundly, quietly, comprehensively capable. You have thought about this for a while, he said. I thought about it when I accepted the match, she said. I knew that whoever I was, and whatever my name was, going to come forward at some point. I made decisions in advance about how I would prefer to handle it. And if I had not found the archive record myself, I would have told you, she said, before the betrothal. Not to surprise you, to make sure you understood what you were agreeing to. He held this, the weight of it, the quiet seriousness of it, the specific consideration it reflected. You were protecting the family name, he said. I was protecting you from being surprised at the worst possible moment, she said. The family name has been protected long enough. It can stand on its own now. He looked at her. She looked back. In the long corridor, with its old stones and its mineral smell, and its small opened cavity in the wall, they stood in the particular quiet of two people who have stopped needing to be careful with each other, which is one of the rarest and most significant things that can happen between two people who have learned to be careful with most things. Lady Sarat, he said, when she comes. I would like to be there, she said. I expected you would. She almost smiled. It was very small and very quick, and she returned to her usual expression immediately, but he saw it. The drainage, he said, looking at the base of the wall where the problem was rooted. Can it be fixed before February? Yes, she said. Easily. The work will take 2 days. I have already written up the specifications. She turned and started back down the corridor. I left them with Agnes. He followed. The palace was warm around them, the old stones holding the day's heat the way old stones do, long after the source of it has gone. Lady Veni Sarat requested a private audience with the Duke on a Thursday morning, 4 days after the Vethric delegation began its formal negotiations. She sent the request through the correct channels, with the appropriate formal language, describing the matter as one of personal and administrative sensitivity. Oliver Creed received the request, noted the phrasing, and brought it to the Duke at 8 in the morning. The Duke read it. He turned the paper over, as if he were checking whether there was something on the back, which there was not. Tomorrow afternoon, he said, the East drawing room. Oliver went to arrange it, and then, on the same afternoon, went to find Mara and inform her. She was with the Vethric delegation. Not formally. The formal session for the day had ended an hour earlier. She was in the small courtyard off the east wing, sitting on the stone bench near the winter bare rose hedge, talking with the elder and Vethric. The elder was sitting at the other end of the bench. Between them, on the bench, was what appeared to be a map. Both of them were looking at the map. The elder was saying something. Mara was listening, and occasionally saying something brief in return. Oliver stood at the entrance to the courtyard and waited. After approximately 5 minutes, the elder looked up and noticed him. He said something to Mara. She looked up and saw Oliver, and said something to the elder, who folded the map with the care of someone who regards it as an important object, and stood. He said something to Mara that Oliver did not understand. She replied, The elder crossed the courtyard toward the palace door, passing Oliver with a small nod that Oliver took as a dignified acknowledgement. "What did he say?" Oliver asked, when Mara reached him. "He said that in 60 years of trade negotiations, he has met 3 people who understood what was being discussed, rather than what was being said, and that this is the 4th time." She looked at the door through which the elder had gone. It was a compliment. He does not give many. "What were you discussing?" "The original coastal route, the specific geography of the Scheldt crossing before the boundary dispute. He had a map I had not seen." She looked at the map she had not, Oliver noted, given back. "He lent it to me. For reference." She folded it and put it in the pocket of her cloak. "You have something to tell me." "Lady Surratt," Oliver said. "Tomorrow afternoon, the East drawing room." She nodded. "Is the Duke telling me the time, or asking?" "Telling," Oliver said. 2 o'clock, she said. "I will be there at 1:30. She went back inside. Oliver stood in the empty courtyard for a moment, looking at the stone bench, and the winter bare rose hedge, and the place where an old man and a young woman had been sitting with a map between them. He went back to the Duke and reported. "She asked if you were telling or asking," he said. The Duke looked up from his work. "And you said?" "Telling." "Good." He turned a page. "She will be there early." 1:30, Oliver confirmed. "Good," the Duke said again. He went back to his work. The East drawing room at 1:30 on Friday afternoon was warm and quiet. The fire had been prepared. The chairs were arranged as they had been for the initial meeting with Mara, conversation chairs rather than ceremony chairs, which was a deliberate choice on the Duke's part. He wanted the room to feel like a discussion rather than an interrogation, because an interrogation atmosphere would put Surratt on guard, and a discussion atmosphere would give her enough ease to say what she actually meant, rather than what she had planned to say. Mara was already in the room when he arrived at 5 minutes to 2. She was sitting in one of the secondary chairs, the ones to the side rather than the central arrangement, which meant she would be visible but not prominent, and would be able to observe without being the focus. He did not comment on this choice. He sat in the central chair. Oliver stood near the door. Lady Surratt arrived exactly at 2. She was dressed, as she always dressed, with a precision that communicated she had made choices rather than simply put things on. Her gown was deep green, which suited her. Her hair was arranged in the style she had worn for 20 years, the one that communicated stability and establishment rather than fashion. She entered the room with the ease of a woman who has entered many rooms and read them before the door was fully open. She read this room in approximately 3 seconds. Oliver noted her eyes move, to the Duke, to the arrangement of the chairs, to the fire, to Mara. Her expression did not change. She crossed to the central arrangement. She accepted the offered seat with the grace of a woman, who would have stood if she preferred it, and has decided, for her own reasons, that sitting is the correct position. "Your Grace," she said, "I appreciate your time." "Of course," he said. "You indicated a matter of sensitivity." "Yes." She settled her hands in her lap in the composed way. "I hope you will forgive the directness, but I find that in matters of this nature, clarity serves everyone better than ceremony." "I appreciate directness," he said. She looked at Mara, briefly, with the look of someone who has noted a presence and is deciding how to account for it. "My lady," she said, "I did not expect you to be here." "Lady Aldine is here at my request," the Duke said. He said it without elaboration, which was its own form of elaboration. Surratt received this. She returned her attention to the Duke. "I have, in the course of my usual attention to the court's affairs, come across some information that I believe pertains to your current arrangement." She paused. "Information of a historical and familial nature." "Go on," the Duke said. "In the Central Archive, there is a record of a name change, approximately 60 years ago. The family in question adopted the name Aldine at that time." She paused again, giving the pause the weight of a person choosing whether to go further. "The original family name, prior to the change, is partially documented, and it is a name of considerable significance." The Duke looked at her. He did not speak. Surratt continued, "I raise this not to create difficulty, but because I believe it is information that should be managed carefully. A name of that significance, attached to your betrothal, could attract a great deal of attention. Attention of a kind that could be beneficial, or could be disruptive, depending on how it is handled. She was now in the space where the offer was being made, the space between the last statement and the direct one, and she occupied it with the skill of a person who has done this many times. I wanted to bring it to your attention privately, so that it could be addressed in a manner of your choosing. The Duke was quiet for a moment. And what would your role be, he said, in this careful management? Sarat opened her mouth. The Duke spoke before she could. Because I want to be certain I understand the nature of what you are offering. Sarat adjusted, very slightly. She was too skilled to show anything as obvious as discomfort, but she had adjusted her assessment of the room in the half-second of the Duke's pause. My role would be whatever is most useful, she said carefully. I have connections with the archive. I have relationships at court. If there is a way to ensure the information surfaces in a way that serves Ashenvale's interests rather than complicating them. Sarat, the Duke said. She stopped. I know about the name, he said. Silence. It lasted for 3 seconds, which was a considerable silence, in a room where a skilled political operator had just had the center of her proposal removed. I have known for 10 days, he said. Oliver found the archive record. We have discussed it at length. He looked at her without hostility, without triumph, with the measured quality of a man who is giving a person a clear and complete picture so that the person can make a clear decision about what to do next. There is no information to manage because the information is already managed. It will be addressed at the appropriate time, in the manner most beneficial to all parties. Sarat looked at him. She looked at Oliver, who looked back with his expression of nothing. She looked at Mara. Mara looked back at her with the direct, steady attention she gave to most things, and did not say anything, because there was nothing she needed to say. I see, Sarat said. 3 words. Perfectly controlled. The response of a woman who has recalibrated a situation with great speed and is deciding, in real time, what the new situation requires. I appreciate your concern for Ashenvale's interests, the Duke said. His voice was entirely even. It carried no edge. It was simply accurate. It speaks well of your commitment to the court. Sarat looked at him again. She understood, with the accuracy of a woman who has survived 20 years in a court environment, exactly what was being done, and exactly why. The information had been diffused by being known. The offer had been received and acknowledged and declined, all in the same moment, and there was no way to push further without making the attempt visible in a way she could not afford. She folded her hands in her lap again, a small, composed gesture. Of course, she said. I am glad the matter is in hand. As am I, he said. She stayed for an appropriate length of time after that, in which they discussed 2 completely unrelated matters of court logistics, and she was gracious and precise, and gave not a single visible indication that anything had gone differently than expected. Then she excused herself. Oliver closed the door after her. The room was quiet. The Duke sat in his chair, not moving, looking at the space that Sarat had occupied. Mara was looking at the fire. Her expression was thoughtful, and not particularly triumphant, because she was not a person who required triumph to feel that something had gone well. She will not try again, the Duke said. Not in this direction, Mara said. She will find another one. She has been doing this for 20 years, and she is good at it. She will recalibrate and find a different approach. She paused, but not this particular angle. She burned it today. She will not come back to burned ground. The archive record, he said. She will continue to have access to it. Yes, but access to information is only leverage if the other party does not have it. She knows you have it. The leverage is gone. The question now is how quickly you choose to address it formally, because she is going to start thinking about whether there is anything she can do with the information in the short window before you do. Before the betrothal, he said. 3 weeks. Yes. He looked at her. And your recommendation? You know my recommendation, she said. I want to hear it again. She said it again. The same words, the same measured sequence. After the betrothal. After the survey. After the Vethric agreement, in the context that makes it meaningful rather than threatening. He listened as if hearing it for the first time, which was the quality of attention he had learned to give to things that mattered. The elder, he said, after she had finished. The map he lent you. It is the original coastal route survey, she said, from before the Scheldt crossing dispute. It confirms the viability of the route, and it was made by the trading company, not by the province, which means it is independent documentation. She reached into her cloak and took out the folded map. He lent it to me, knowing what it is and what it could be used for. He looked at the map. He looked at her. He trusts you, he said. He trusts what I know, she said. It is not quite the same thing, but it produces the same result. She handed him the map. He took it and unfolded it carefully, the way you handle something old that has been carried and folded and treated with care for a long time. The map was detailed, the coastline, the crossing point, the route inland, and the original route, the shorter one, the one that had been lost when the boundary dispute closed the crossing. It was exactly what it needed to be. 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks, she agreed. He folded the map back along its existing lines, the way the elder had folded it, with the care of someone who regards it as an important object. He set it on the table between them. The fire crackled. The room was warm. Neither of them reached for the map again. In the days that followed the meeting with Surat, the palace went about its regular business with the focused industry of a place that has things to accomplish and the people to accomplish them. The Vethric delegation entered its second formal session. The agreement framework became a preliminary draft. The preliminary draft was reviewed by Oliver's office, revised in 3 places, reviewed again, and pronounced satisfactory by all parties. The elder said something during the final review session that Mara translated for the Duke as the equivalent of a traditional Vethric blessing on a new commercial agreement, which the Duke received with the gravity the elder clearly expected it to receive. The boundary survey was commissioned. Lord Pharaoh received the decision with the dignity of a man who has been shown he was wrong and has chosen to regard the showing as a service rather than an insult. He did not agree with the cost analysis at first. Oliver provided him with the geological records. Lord Pharaoh read them. He came back 2 days later and said, in a voice that cost him something, that the geological evidence was compelling. Lord Bassett said nothing at all, which was his way of expressing deep satisfaction. The North Corridor drainage was repaired. It took 2 days, as Mara had said it would. The head builder, a man named Ed Crane who had been working on the palace structures for 11 years and had a professional relationship with this particular drainage problem, said afterward that the specifications she had left with Agnes were the clearest instructions he had received from anyone in a decade, and that whoever had written them understood stone and water in a way that most people who worked with stone and water did not. Agnes told Mara this. Mara said she was glad it had been clear, and went back to her maps. The small leather book lived in the locked box with the portrait. Mara had read it twice by this point, and she had made notes, separately, on a clean set of pages that she kept folded inside the front cover. The notes were a timeline, a careful sequencing of the events described in the accounts, cross-referenced with the public records she had found in the archive's accessible sections. What the book described, stripped of its personal grief and its specific fear, was a family that had left a place they could not safely remain in, and arrived somewhere new, and reinvented themselves with the systematic thoroughness of people who understood that the old version of themselves was a liability. They had been careful. They had been patient. They had said less than they knew for 2 generations, and they had taught their children to do the same. What Mara had always understood to be a family tendency toward quiet, toward restraint, toward reading rather than speaking, was not a tendency at all. It was a practice. It had been deliberately instilled. She thought about this, in the quiet of the evenings, when the palace had settled into its night sounds, and the candle on her table burned at the exact pace of her reading. She thought about what it meant to be the product of a deliberate practice, rather than a natural disposition. She thought about Margot, who had probably never been called Margot, who had taught her languages, and history, and Eastern trade routes, and how to read what was being said beneath what was being said. What did it mean to be prepared for something no one had ever told you was coming? It meant that whoever had done the preparing had believed, or hoped, or at minimum kept open the possibility, that there would come a moment when the preparation would be needed, that the quiet and the restraint and the reading and the careful waiting were not simply survival tools, but something else, something pointed toward a future that had been imagined, even if it had not been planned. She did not think about this in terms of her own importance. She was not a woman who spent much time on her own importance. She thought about it in terms of accuracy. If the preparation was for something, what was that something? And was this it? A minor house's third daughter, in a ducal palace, with a boundary map and a trade agreement, and a name in a damaged archive file? Maybe. Maybe not. She was not sure it mattered. She was here now. She would do what was in front of her. She would do it carefully, and well, and she would not make it smaller than it was, by being modest about it, and she would not make it larger than it was, by attaching significance to things that were just work. She read until the candle burned low. She went to sleep. In the mornings that followed, she walked. This was new. She had not walked in the mornings before, or not with any regularity, but the palace had a route that went from the east garden down the long south path and around the back of the kitchen garden and up through a small gate into the section of grounds that held the training yard, and at 7 in the morning this route was quiet, except for the sound of the training yard coming alive. And the training yard at 7 in the morning contained, among other people, the Duke. He was not there every morning. He was there 3 mornings out of 5, which was often enough to be a pattern. She did not adjust her route to intersect with the training yard. She walked past it on the established path, which happened to take her along the fence line, which happened to allow a clear view of the yard. He noticed her on the 3rd morning. He was in the middle of a practice bout with a younger man, and he could not stop in the middle of it. But he tracked her with his eyes as she walked past, which she knew because she was watching him from the corner of her vision, which was where she did most of her watching. On the 5th morning he was finishing as she came past, and he called across the yard, "Lady Aldine." She stopped. "You walk early," he said, crossing toward the fence. "I do," she agreed. "There is a better path," he said, "through the north gate and down the hill. There are fewer ruts." "I am not bothered by ruts," she said. He looked at her over the fence. His face was slightly red from the exertion of the practice bout, and his hair was disordered in the way of a person who was not thinking about their appearance at 7 in the morning, which was fine, since neither was she. "The Vethric elder," he said. "He asked Oliver this morning whether you are formally employed by the delegation." She raised an eyebrow. Oliver told him no. The elder said it was a loss for the trading company. He said it in a tone that indicated he was not entirely joking. He paused. "He asked to be notified when the betrothal is formally announced." She absorbed this. "Why?" He did not explain. Oliver thought it was related to the Eastern Territories. If the name becomes associated with the Ashenvale match publicly, it changes the weight of the trading agreement, gives it a historical anchor. "That is exactly why," she said. He nodded. He looked at the fence between them for a moment, which was old iron and needed attention at 2 of its posts, a thing she had noticed the first time she walked past it. "The agreement," he said. "When it is formalized, the elder wishes to attend the ceremony." "Which ceremony?" "The betrothal," he said. "He requested it this morning." She looked at him. He looked back. The 7 o'clock training yard was not a ceremonial space. It was a practical space, full of the ordinary sounds of work and early morning, and they were standing on either side of an iron fence that needed attention at 2 of its posts. "He is making a statement," she said. "Yes." "The trading company aligning itself with the match." "Yes." "That will be noticed." "Yes," he said. "It will." He paused. "It will be noticed by the people it is intended to be noticed by." She thought about this. She thought about the elder who had sat with her on the bench with his old map between them, and who had said, at one point during their conversation, something she had translated to herself as approximately, "The strongest agreements are the ones where both parties already understand each other's position before the formal language begins." "He planned this," she said. "Since the first session," the Duke said. "He was testing the arrangement from the beginning. The receiving room, the first questions, the philosophical assessments. He was deciding whether to attach his trading company's name to this match." "Yes." She turned and looked at the training yard, the quiet, ordered space of it, the younger man who had been the Duke's practice partner now working through footwork drills along the far fence. "If the elder attends," she said, "it will be interpreted as the trading company endorsing the match." "Yes, and if the name becomes known at the same time, then the endorsement is for the match and everything the match represents," he said. "The trading history, the Eastern Territories, the Celt crossing, the coastal route." She was quiet for a moment. He is not just a trading elder, she said. It was not a question. No, the Duke said. He represents 4 trading families, the largest in the Eastern Territories. She looked at him. He looked back. The fence between them. The quiet morning. 3 weeks, she said. Yes, he said. She turned and continued on her walk. He watched her go along the path, past the kitchen garden gate, back toward the palace's east wing, moving at the same unhurried pace she always moved at. He stood at the fence for a moment after she had gone. Then he went to find Oliver and ask him to arrange for the iron fence posts to be seen to before the betrothal ceremony. 2 days before the betrothal ceremony, a letter arrived from Mara's sister Clara. It was a long letter. Clara wrote long letters when she was worried, and short ones when she was not, and this one filled both sides of 2 sheets in the slightly urgent hand of someone who has been composing the letter in their head for several weeks before finally writing it down. Clara wanted to know if she was all right. Clara wanted to know if the Duke was cold to her, because everyone said he was cold, and Clara was aware that cold was manageable, but cold directed at Mara specifically would be a different thing. Clara wanted to know if anyone at the palace was unkind. Clara wanted to know what the library was like, because she had told their mother that Mara would probably be happiest in a palace with a good library, and their mother had told her that Mara's happiness was a great deal more complicated than whether the library was good, and they had argued about this for 20 minutes, in a way that Clara's letter made sound slightly fond. At the bottom of the second page, in smaller writing that suggested it had been added after the letter was nominally finished, Clara had written, "I think about what you said when you decided to go, that it was a reasonable thing. I know you said that so that we would not worry. I just want you to know that we are worrying anyway, and that if it is not reasonable, you can tell me." Mara sat with the letter in her room for a while. Then she wrote back, Clara's questions, in order. She was all right. The Duke was not cold to her specifically. He was simply precise, which was different from cold in that it carried no hostility. No one at the palace was unkind. The library was exceptional, and if Clara ever visited, she would have to be physically removed from it. She wrote this first and then looked at it for a moment. Then she wrote, "What I said when I decided to go was true. It is also true that I did not know, when I said it, what I was actually agreeing to. I knew the practical arrangement. I did not know what the situation would be in the specific, daily, particular sense of what it means to be in a place with a person and find out who that person actually is, rather than who everyone says they are. What I will tell you is that what I have found is not what I expected. It is better than what I expected, in ways I did not know to expect. I am not unhappy. I am not pretending not to be unhappy. This is the specific, honest version. I know you will read it 3 times, because I wrote it simply. And I am telling you now that you do not need to read it a 3rd time, because it means what it says." She signed it and sealed it and gave it to George to send. George took it and then looked at her with the expression he had been wearing more often in the past week, a look that contained several questions he was professionally committed to not asking. "What is it, George?" she said. "The court, my lady," he said. "They are talking about the ceremony." "What are they saying?" "Different things." He was working very hard to phrase this correctly. She could see it on his face. The effort of a young man who wants to convey something without conveying too much. Some of them were there when the Duke's first wife used to attend court events. They remember her. She was... He stopped. "You can say it," she said. "She was very much noticed," he said. "She was the kind of person you noticed immediately. Everyone says so." He looked at his feet for a moment. "And there is talk about the ceremony, about how it will look, whether it will be compared." She looked at him. He looked at his feet. "George," she said, "did anyone assign you to tell me this?" "No, my lady." He looked up, and his face was completely honest, which was one of the things she had liked about him since the first morning. "I just thought you should know what people were saying, in case it mattered to you." "Thank you," she said. "It is useful to know." She thought about this after he left. It was, she supposed, a reasonable concern. A duke's second wife is always positioned against the memory of the first, in the way that anything that occupies a space previously occupied by something remarkable is positioned against what was there before. This was not a judgment. It was simply the geometry of situations. She thought about what the court would be expecting at the ceremony. They would be expecting someone plain, which was what had been ordered and what appeared to have been delivered. They would be expecting a quiet, unremarkable woman who would not invite comparison because she was not the kind of woman comparisons were made about. They would be polite. They would be civil. They would not be particularly interested because they had heard the story and assessed it already. She sat at her window in the last of the afternoon light and thought about this with the practical attention she gave to most situations. Then she thought about something else. She thought about the fact that she was, in point of fact, exactly what had been ordered and what had been delivered. She was not performing plainness. She was not pretending to be ordinary. She was, by her own understanding, exactly what she had always been, which was someone who did not need to be noticed in order to do what needed doing. What she was also, she understood now, was someone who was carrying a name that, when it became known, was going to complicate every simple assessment the court had made of her. And that was not her problem to manage. She had decided this already, in the East Garden, in the North Corridor, at the fence by the training yard. She was not going to manage how the name landed. She was going to let it land when the Duke decided it should land, in the context he had chosen for it, and the court could revise its assessment as many times as necessary. This was, she recognized, an easy position to hold when you had already made peace with how other people saw you, which she had made, at some point in her youth, decisively and completely. It was one of the few permanent decisions she had made. The candle burned. She picked up her pen and began writing the notes for the geological survey specifications she had been asked to review, which the Provincial Land Office had sent over that morning. The work in front of her. The work always in front of her. She worked until dinner. The morning of the betrothal ceremony began with rain. Not heavy rain, but the persistent, committed kind that comes with cold fronts in autumn and does not consider stopping for social occasions. The palace windows ran with it. The courtyard, which had been groomed for the occasion, absorbed it with the pragmatic patience of a well-maintained space. Agnes arrived at Mara's room at 6:30 with the dress. It was not the deep blue she had brought. It was something Agnes had arranged, with Oliver's knowledge and the Duke's unspoken approval, a task that had involved 2 local seamstresses working through the past week on a commission that Agnes had described to them as urgent and important, without explaining why. The dress was a particular shade of green, not the bright green of spring, but the deep, specific green of old tapestries, of forests, of something that had been present for a long time and had settled into its presence. It was simple in cut, because that was the instruction Agnes had given, simple but exact, the kind of simple that is its own form of statement. Mara looked at it. "It is from the palace household budget," Agnes said. "Oliver authorized it. The Duke did not comment, which means he approves." "He has not seen it," Mara said. "He approved it in principle," Agnes said. "He told Oliver that whatever I thought was appropriate was appropriate." This was, Mara understood, a form of trust that the Duke did not extend casually. "Thank you," she said. She put the dress on. The hall of mirrors had been prepared since before dawn. The polished metal panels had been cleaned, which meant the room reflected itself in its slightly distorted, elongated way, and the candles in the wall brackets multiplied themselves in the reflection until the room seemed to contain twice as many as it did. The chairs had been arranged in the ceremonial configuration, 2 long rows facing the central aisle, with the high chairs at the front for the senior council members and the court's older families. By 9:30, the room was full. The court of Ashenvale was not, by the standards of the capital's central court, an especially large one. But it was a complete one, in the sense that everyone who was meant to be present was present, and several who had not been specifically invited had found reasons to attend, because the Duke's betrothal was the first significant court event in 4 years, and people who maintain their positions in courts do not miss significant events. Lady Vene Surratt sat in the 4th row on the west side, in her deep green gown, which was not the same deep green as the dress Agnes had commissioned, but which was similar enough that when Mara walked through the door and Surratt saw her, something passed through Surratt's face that was not any of her usual controlled expressions. It was recognition. The recognition of a woman who has spent 20 years reading rooms and the people in them, and who has just read something she did not expect to read. Mara walked into the Hall of Mirrors at exactly 10 o'clock. She walked at the same pace she always walked, which was not fast or slow, but the pace of someone who knows where they are going. She wore the deep green dress, and her hair was arranged in a way Agnes had done, not the elaborate arrangements of court fashion. Something simpler, the kind of arrangement that requires actual skill to look as simple as it does. She did not wear the plain gray cloak. The hood was nowhere. The court, which had been prepared for someone they did not need to look at twice, looked at her twice. And then some of them looked again. Not because of the dress, which was good but not remarkable. Not because of the hair, which was well done but not exceptional. But because of the way she moved through the room, the specific quality of her movement, which was the quality the Duke had been trying to find a word for since the beginning, and which the court was now experiencing for the first time, and which did not have a simple name. It was the quality of a person who is entirely where they are. Not performing presence, not filling space, not managing an impression. Simply there, in the room, looking at what there was to look at. Walking toward the front with the same focused, practical composure she gave to old libraries, and drainage problems, and Vethric trading elders. The Duke was already at the front, standing on the two-step dais. He watched her walk toward him. He watched with the expression that was not the inventory expression from the first morning, and was not the door you have been walking past expression, and was not the East drawing room expression. It was a fourth expression, one no one in the room had seen on his face before, because he had not had occasion to use it in a long time. He was simply watching her. She stopped at the prescribed distance. She looked at him. He looked at her. The officiant began the formal words. The formal words of a betrothal ceremony at Ashenvale took approximately 12 minutes and covered the legal and household requirements of the arrangement, the expectations of both parties, the timeline for the formal marriage, and several traditional statements whose precise meaning had been contested by legal scholars for a century, and which were retained, because removing them would be more trouble than leaving them. Mara listened to all of it. The Duke listened to all of it. They signed the required documents in the order they were presented, she with her clean, deliberate hand, he with the signature she recognized from the decree that had started everything, heavy and efficient and sure of itself. And then the officiant turned to address the assembled court. It remains, the officiant said, the tradition of this house, in the ceremony of formal betrothal, for the traveling cloak to be removed as a symbol of arrival, of having come home. Mara's hands did not move. She was still, a specific, particular still. The officiant looked at her. Lady Aldine, the officiant said. He was being kind. He was following a tradition he had performed many times and was not interested in discomfort. If you would remove your traveling cloak. She did not have her traveling cloak. She had not worn it. But she had the hood of the green dress, which Agnes had constructed with this moment in mind, which Agnes had built into the design without explanation, and which Mara had noticed, but not asked about, because she had understood, with the accuracy that characterized most of her understandings, why it was there. She reached up. She put the hood down. And then she looked at the court, which looked back at her, and the court had been looking at her for 12 minutes already, and for 12 minutes they had been assembling an impression, and the impression had included many things, the quality of her movement, the composure of her attention, the way she handled documents, the way she received formal words. It had not yet included her face. Fully visible, in the candlelight of the hall of mirrors, with the polished panels throwing the image back in their long, slightly distorted reflection. The court had 60 years of history between it and the moment it was now experiencing, and some of them had the history in portraits, and some of them had it in books, and some of them had it in the stories their grandparents had told, and it was not a perfect match, because 60 years and 3 generations had softened some lines and sharpened others, but it was close enough. It was considerably more than close enough. The gasping did not begin quietly. Lady Surratt did not gasp. She was too skilled for that. But she closed her eyes for one deliberate second, which was the equivalent, for a woman of her control, of a gasp. Lord Pharaoh, who had the kind of memory for portraits that some people have for faces, turned to the person next to him. His mouth moved. He said nothing out loud, but the words were visible. Lord Bassett, who trusted evidence over speculation, sat very still, and looked at the Duke's betrothed with the expression of a man who has just had an 11-year calculation resolve itself in a way he had not anticipated, and is deciding whether this is a problem. It was not a problem. He decided this in approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked at the Duke. The Duke was looking at Mara. He had known, since the garden. He had known before the garden, since the archive file, since Oliver's careful voice reading 2 words from a damaged note. He had had time to prepare for this moment, to arrange his face appropriately, to receive what was happening with the measured, even composure of a man who is governing a province and has a ceremony to complete. His face was not entirely governed. Not badly, not in a way that the court could easily describe later, because it was not an expression most of them had context for. But it was not the face of a man receiving expected information. It was not the face of a man who had ordered something plain and received something plain. It was the face of a man who had ordered one thing and received, without being told, exactly what he needed. He looked at her. She looked back at him, with the gray eyes that were steady and direct, and she did not look triumphant, and she did not look afraid, and she did not look particularly anything, except present, in the room, with the full attention she gave to all things. She was simply there. The officiant had stopped speaking. He recovered. He completed the ceremony. The room was very quiet. What happens after a room full of people gasps is the same thing that always happens after any public moment of revelation. The room finds its breath again, and once it has its breath, it begins to talk. The court of Ashenvale talked. They talked quietly at first, in the immediate aftermath of the ceremony, in the way of people who are aware that they are in an official setting, and that official settings require a certain restraint, even when something extraordinary has just occurred. They spoke in low voices to the people immediately beside them. They formed small clusters as the formal ceremony gave way to the reception that followed, and in those clusters the talk became less restrained and more particular. The question everyone was assembling, in their different ways, was the same question: how had no one known? Because in a court, not knowing something is its own kind of event. It raises the question of who knew and when, and whether the not knowing was deliberate, and if it was deliberate, what that says about the people who had decided not to tell you. Lady Surratt stood with a glass of wine in the reception room and listened to 3 separate conversations without appearing to listen to any of them. She was doing what she had done for 20 years, reading the room, accurately, completely, and with the specific patience of a woman who knows that events have their own momentum, and that the correct response to momentum is to understand its direction before you decide which way to move. She understood the direction. The Duke had known. Oliver Creed had known. The Lady Aldine had known, in the sense that knowing your own name is knowing. These were the people who had the information, and they had held it exactly long enough. What Surratt was revising, in the careful internal accounting she maintained, was not her assessment of the Duke, who had behaved exactly as she should have expected a careful man to behave when given sensitive information. She was revising her assessment of Mara Aldine. She had assessed Mara Aldine as interesting but manageable, as someone who was more than she appeared but who was still, fundamentally, in a position of negotiating the terms of a marriage from a disadvantaged starting point, a third daughter of a minor house. She had been wrong about the starting point. Not wrong about the minor house, that was correct. The house was minor. The circumstances that had made it minor were now considerably more legible than they had been before today, and the legibility changed everything. Lady Surratt was not a woman who wasted energy on regret. She was a woman who recalibrated and moved. She recalibrated now, standing with her wine glass, watching the room. Mara was across the room, speaking with Lord Bassett. Surratt watched this with the complete attention she usually reserved for things she was deciding how to use. Lord Bassett was saying something. Whatever he was saying, it was the kind of thing he said rarely, which was apparent, because he was gesturing, which was something he almost never did. She was listening with the quality of listening she gave to all things, the direct attention, the absence of performance. Bassett finished what he was saying. She replied, brief, as always. He nodded twice. Surratt took a careful sip of her wine. That was the moment she made the decision, which was not a decision she had entered the room intending to make, and which was the correct decision, and she knew it. She set down her glass. She crossed the room with the composure of a woman who has been crossing rooms for 20 years. She arrived at the small cluster of space where Mara was standing, now alone for a moment, Bassett having moved away. Mara looked at her. Sarat looked at Mara. "Lady Aldine," she said. "Lady Sarat," she replied. There was a pause. "You were not what I expected," Sarat said. She said it with complete frankness, because frankness at this point was both appropriate and the only credible position. There was nothing to be gained by pretending she had expected this, because Mara was not a person who would be convinced by a pretense, and Sarat was not a person who liked being seen through. "No," Mara agreed. "I imagine not." Sarat looked at her with the full assessment she had been holding back since the first audience. "You knew, when you accepted the match, that this would eventually surface." "Yes." "And you accepted it anyway." "Yes." Sarat was quiet for a moment. "You were not afraid of what would happen." It was almost a question. "I was afraid of some things," Mara said. She said it without drama, as she said everything. "I was not afraid of the name. A name is a historical fact. Historical facts do not become less true by being kept quiet." Sarat looked at her for a moment longer. Then she said, with the specific honesty of a woman who has decided that honesty is both appropriate and strategically sound, "I underestimated you." "I know," Mara said. "A beat." "I appreciate that you are not telling me it is all right," Sarat said. "It is not for me to tell you what is all right," Mara said. Sarat almost smiled. It was very controlled, but it was there. "No," she said, "it is not." She paused. "The Eastern Territories, the Boundary Survey, the Vethric Agreement, these things did not happen independently." "No," Mara agreed. "They were connected." "Most things are connected," Mara said. "The question is usually whether you are reading the connections or trying to establish them after the fact." Sarat absorbed this. She looked at Mara Aldine, third daughter of a minor house, betrothed of the Duke of Ashenvale, standing in the reception room of the Hall of Mirrors, in a deep green dress with her face visible, and her hood folded behind her, and the court of Ashenvale, revising its understanding of reality, at a pace that would keep it occupied for the better part of a week. "You are going to be very difficult to work with," Sarat said. It was not an insult. "Probably," Mara agreed. This time Sarat did smile, and it was genuine, which was something the court rarely saw from her, and which the three people close enough to noticed, and would mention to other people for some time afterward. She inclined her head. Mara inclined hers. Sarat moved away into the room. Mara turned back to the reception, which was full of people talking and not talking, and trying to decide what they were going to say about this to the people who had not been here, and she accepted a glass of water from a passing footman and drank it with the practical efficiency of a woman who has been standing in formal settings for 3 hours and is beginning to find the standing more tiring than the talking. The Duke appeared beside her. He did not announce himself. He simply arrived, the way he arrived at most places, with the quiet competence of someone who moves through a room as if the room has anticipated his path. He stood beside her and looked out at the reception with the same expression she wore, which was the expression of two people surveying a situation they have managed and are now watching move forward under its own momentum. "Sarat," he said. "She recalibrated," Mara said. "She will be useful." "You think so?" "She has been at this court for 20 years, Mara said. "She knows it in ways I do not. She will be watching to see whether I am worth working with." She paused. "I think I can be, if she is." He was quiet for a moment. "Lord Bassett," he said. "What did he say?" He said that he had been waiting 11 years for something to make the Eastern Territory situation legible, and that he had not expected it to walk through the door in a wool cloak. She paused. He also said, "The geological survey specifications I submitted were the clearest he had received since he took the committee chair. He would like me to attend the next survey planning session." "He did not ask me," the Duke said. "He asked me," she said. "I told him I would check with you." "You do not need to check with me." "I know," she said. "I told him I would anyway, because it is polite and because it is accurate. I am checking with you." He looked at her. She looked back. "Yes," he said. "You should attend." "Thank you," she said. The reception continued around them. The Vethric elder was seated in a corner with a cup of tea, speaking with Oliver Creed in a version of the common language that was accented but clear, and occasionally looking across the room at the Duke and Mara, with the satisfied expression of a man who has assessed a situation correctly and is taking quiet pleasure in the accuracy of his assessment. Lord Pharaoh was in animated conversation with two members of the Southern Council, and from the energy of it, he had already begun narrating the afternoon's events in the version that would eventually become the one he told at dinner tables for the next decade. The rain had stopped outside. The courtyard, visible through the long windows of the reception room, was clean and wet, the prepared stones gleaming with it, the air outside clear in the specific way it is clear after a committed autumn rain. "Your sister," he said. "Did you tell her to come?" She looked at him. "Clara? No. She is in the Western Holdings. She will want to know. She will have the letter I sent yesterday," Mara said. "She will read it 3 times, and then write back immediately. George will have her reply by the end of the week." He nodded. "My mother," she said, and then stopped. He looked at her. "My mother knows what will happen when this becomes known. She spent 30 years protecting the name and the line and the daughters she made from it. She will know, when she hears, that it is out." She paused. "I do not know how she will receive that. Relief, perhaps," he said. "Perhaps." She looked at the rain-wet courtyard. "Or grief. Those two things are not always as different from each other as you expect." He was quiet. "The box," she said. "The book. When this is formally documented and publicly known, the material in the box becomes historically significant, not just personally." She turned to look at him. "The portrait especially. I want you to know that I understand what that means. I am not going to pretend it is simple." "Nothing about this is simple," he said. "No," she agreed. "But most of the parts of it are manageable. I am very good at managing parts of things." He almost smiled. It was very small and very quick, the same way hers had been in the East Garden. "I know," he said. The reception moved around them, the court of Ashenvale processing an afternoon that none of them had predicted, and all of them would be talking about for a long time. Outside, the courtyard gleamed in the aftermath of the rain. Inside, the candles burned in their brackets, and the polished metal panels reflected the room back at itself, slightly elongated, slightly distorted, the way reflections always are, which is not a flaw but simply the honest difference between a thing and the image of a thing. They stood side by side and looked at the room. Neither of them needed to say anything. This was the new version of the silence, the one that had replaced the careful, managed silences of the first weeks, the practiced quiet of two people who had learned, separately, to be economical with themselves. It was not that silence. It was simpler than that. It was just two people, standing in the same room, looking at the same thing, with no particular need for anything more than that right now. The elder raised his cup of tea across the room in a small gesture. Mara caught it and inclined her head. The reception went on. The letters arrived in the 5 days that followed the betrothal ceremony. Not 1 or 2 letters. 17 letters, in the first week alone, addressed to the Duke of Ashenvale, from sources ranging from the Central Court's administration office to 3 foreign trading houses to 1 ancient institution that had not written to Ashenvale in 11 years, and whose letterhead Oliver Creed recognized before he had fully unfolded the paper. He brought them to the Duke in a stack. The Duke read the first 3, and set them down, and looked at his desk for a moment. Then he sent for Mara. She arrived in 12 minutes, which meant she had been in the old library, which was the logical place to look for her, but which was a 5-minute walk from the study, and she had not hurried. She had simply moved at her usual pace. Oliver set a chair. She sat. The Duke gave her the letters in the order he had read them. She read them in the same order. At the same pace she read everything, which was faster than most people read without appearing to hurry. She did not make sounds while reading. She set each letter face down on the completed side of the desk. When she had finished, she straightened the stack. "The administration office is concerned about formal documentation," she said. "They want to know whether the historical record is being updated, and if so, which archive will hold the primary record, and what the timeline is." "Yes," he said. "The 3 trading houses are interested in the Eastern Territories. They are writing as if they are expressing congratulations, but they are actually making inquiries about whether the Vethric agreement signals a broader commercial opening. They want to know if they are being invited to compete for the route or whether the agreement is exclusive. Yes. And the letter from the institution, she said. That is the one that requires the most immediate attention. He nodded. The institution was old. It was called, in its formal designation, the Historical Preservation Council of the Eastern Territories, which was a name that sounded bureaucratic and was, in fact, considerably more significant than bureaucratic. It had been founded in the period of political upheaval that had erased the family name from the public record, precisely to maintain the record of that upheaval for the day it became possible to maintain it publicly. It had been waiting, in its patient institutional way, for 60 years. The letter said, in formal language that was careful and restrained, and which Mara read as barely contained, that the council was aware of the betrothal and its implications, and that the council wished to offer its services in verifying the historical documentation, in preparing a formal account suitable for public record, and in facilitating the transition from private preservation to public acknowledgement. It also said, in the final paragraph, that the council had materials in its possession that they believed would be of personal significance to the family in question, and that they wished to arrange an appropriate transfer at the earliest convenient time. Materials, Mara said. Yes, the Duke said. She looked at the letter. She was very still. What kind of materials? She said. I do not know specifically. Oliver has made inquiries. He paused. The council representative who signed the letter is a man named Henry Adwell. He has been director of the council for 30 years. Oliver was able to reach his office this morning. What did his office say? That the materials include personal correspondence, property records, and 2 portrait commissions from the original period. She was quiet. Oliver, standing near the door, was watching her with the careful attention of a man who understands that this is a significant moment for the person at the center of it, and who is managing his own presence accordingly. 2 portraits, she said. That is what was indicated, yes. She looked at her hands. They were folded on the desk in front of her, the same composed posture she maintained in most conversations. But there was something different about it now. A stillness that was not the working stillness of her thinking, but something else. My mother, she said. She does not know about the council. No. She may not know these materials exist. That is possible, the Duke said. She spent 30 years maintaining the silence, Mara said. She believed, and she taught us to believe, that the silent version of the family was all that remained, that everything before the name change was gone. She paused. If there are portraits, she will want to see them. Yes, he said. And correspondence, from the original period. She looked up. It is going to be very large, for her. It is going to be something she did not know she could have. I know, he said. She sat with this for a moment. She was not managing it the way she managed most things, with immediate practical assessment. She was letting it be large, which was, Oliver thought, the correct thing to do with it. Tell Director Adwell, she said, when she spoke again, that we will meet with the council in 3 weeks. After the formal arrangement has been further established, I would like my mother to be present for the transfer of materials. The Duke looked at her. I will see that the invitation is arranged, he said. She nodded. She picked up the stack of letters and began to sort them into a second stack, with the systematic attention of someone who has decided that being practical is both appropriate and protective right now. The trading houses, she said. The route should not be exclusive. The agreement with the Vethric Company gives them preferred status on the coastal crossing, not monopoly. The distinction matters. I agree, he said. Lord Bassett's office can draft the language. He understands what exclusive does to market behavior. Yes. She set the sorted letters on the correct side of the desk and stood. She was about to say something practical about the administration office and the archive documentation. Mara, the Duke said. She stopped. He looked at her. He did not say anything immediately, which was unusual for him, because he was a man who, when he said a name to get someone's attention, generally had the next sentence ready. Your mother, he said. She can stay as long as she wishes, when she comes. She looked at him. He looked back, with the precise, even face that she had learned over the past weeks was not the face of a man who is feeling nothing, but the face of a man who has decided that what he is feeling is best expressed through what he does rather than what he says. "Thank you," she said. She left. Oliver waited. "The administration office," the Duke said, and they went back to the work. Eleanor Aldine received the letter from her daughter on a Saturday. She read it the way she read most things, carefully and alone, in the small room off the main hall that she used for correspondence and accounts, and the kind of private thinking that required a door between it and the rest of the household. She had read every letter Mara had ever sent in this room, including the ones from the first years after Mara had gone to study with Margot, and the later ones from the season she spent at the Eastern Provincial Library, and the one 2 months ago that had said simply, in Mara's clean handwriting, "I have agreed to the match. I will write when I am settled." This letter was longer than most of Mara's letters. Eleanor read it once. She sat with it for a moment. She read it again. The letter did not describe the betrothal ceremony in the way one might expect a description of a betrothal ceremony to read. It did not describe the gown or the decorations or the ceremony of it. It described, with Mara's characteristic accuracy, what had happened, beginning with the hood coming down, and ending with the reception, and the elders' raised teacup, and what Lord Bassett had said, and what Lady Surratt had said. And then, at the end, it described the Historical Preservation Council, and what the council had told them it held in its keeping. Eleanor set the letter down. She sat in the small room for a long time. Clara knocked on the door at noon, and then again at past, and then opened the door on the third knock, because the silence had gotten to a quality she did not like. Eleanor was sitting in her chair by the window. She was not reading. She was not working. She was looking at the garden outside the window, with the expression of someone who is seeing something the garden does not contain. "Mother," Clara said. Eleanor turned. Her face was the composed, particular face of a woman who has held many things for many years, and has learned to hold them without showing the weight. But her eyes were different. They were not sad. They were not exactly happy. They were the eyes of a woman who has just been given something she had spent 30 years believing was gone forever, and who is still deciding, in the deep private part of her, how to receive it. "Mara has asked me to come to Ashenvale," she said. Clara sat down. She said nothing. "The council," Eleanor said. "I did not know." "What council?" Clara said. Eleanor picked up the letter. She handed it to Clara. She let her read it. Clara read. She was not as fast as Mara. She read the letter with the gradual unfolding of a person following a narrative, rather than extracting information from it. Halfway through, her face changed. By the end, she was very still. "Portraits," she said. "Two," Eleanor said. "From the original period." "Yes." Clara set the letter down carefully on the edge of the desk. "Mother, the family, the things you told us were gone." "I believed they were gone," Eleanor said. "When your grandmother made the arrangement, when the name was changed, she said everything before was finished. She said it was necessary. She said it was to protect us." She paused. "She was right about all of those things. And now, Eleanor said, and stopped. The garden outside the window was brown and quiet in the November light. A bird moved through the bare hedge near the wall, quick and particular. "I want to see them," Eleanor said. "The portraits. Whatever is in the correspondence. I want to see what there is." She was very calm, the kind of calm that has been assembled deliberately from smaller, less calm parts. I did not think I would ever have the chance. Clara crossed the room. She sat in the chair beside her mother. She did not say anything. After a while, Eleanor said, "Your sister." "She found it," Clara said. "She found all of it," Eleanor said. "She found the match, and she found the situation, and she found what was in it." She paused. She knew, going in, more than I knew to tell her. She found the rest on her own. "She is Mara," Clara said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "She is." They sat in the small room by the window in the November quiet. Later, Eleanor wrote to Mara to say she would come. She wrote a longer letter than she usually wrote, which was still a short one by most standards, and she said what she needed to say, which was that she was proud, and that she was glad, and that she was afraid, and that the afraid part was old and familiar, and she was not going to let it be larger than the glad part. She sealed the letter and gave it to the household boy to send. Then she went to find the trunk in the back storage room, the old one she had not opened in 11 years, and she stood in front of it for a moment. She opened it. Inside, in the careful packing of a woman who knew how to preserve things for a long time, was the documentation she had carried from her own mother's house when she married, and from her grandmother's house before that. The papers that confirmed the name change, the small items that had been kept because they could be kept without being conspicuous. A piece of old fabric, folded precisely. A ring that no one had ever explained to her because her grandmother had not been able to say the explanation out loud. She looked at it all for a long time. She did not cry. She was her grandmother's granddaughter, and her grandmother's granddaughter had inherited a particular kind of patience. She repacked the trunk carefully. She began to prepare for the journey to Ashenvale. In the old library of the palace, Mara was working on the boundary survey specifications when George knocked with a parcel. The parcel was from Director Adwell of the Historical Preservation Council. It had arrived that morning, ahead of the formal meeting that had been arranged. Oliver had brought it to the library because Mara was there. She opened it. Inside was a letter from the director, 2 pages, formal and careful, and beneath the letter, wrapped in heavy cloth, was a single item, not a portrait, something smaller. She unwrapped it. It was a ring. Old, gold, with a specific pattern worked into the band, a pattern she had not seen before, but which had the quality of something significant, something that was meaningful to the person who had designed it, and to the people who received it. On the inside of the band, in script too small to read without bringing it close, was a name. Not Aldine. The other name. The real one. She sat at the large table in the old library, with the ring in her hand, and the maps in front of her, and the river course drawing she had been working on for 3 weeks. She looked at the ring for a long time. Then she placed it carefully on the cloth. She picked up her pencil. She made the note she had been meaning to make, on the river drawing. A small, precise mark that confirmed the angle of the redirected channel. The ring sat beside the drawing. Both things were true at the same time. This was, she had learned, how most things worked. She wore the ring to dinner that evening. On her right hand, where it fit precisely, which was probably not a coincidence, because the people who had made it for someone of her build, and that was not a thing that changed across 3 generations in a straight-line family. The Duke noticed it. He did not say anything during dinner, which was the small household dinner, not a formal occasion, him and Mara and Oliver on the evenings, when Oliver had business that ran late enough to make it sensible for him to stay. It was a comfortable arrangement that had developed without being planned. Oliver ate quickly and with focus, as he did most things. The Duke ate with the practical efficiency of a man who regards food as sustenance and is not particularly interested in it, beyond that, which was not something she had expected, and which she had, in the weeks since, come to find oddly reassuring. She ate with the same unhurried attention she gave to most things, which meant she was usually last finished. The ring was visible. The Duke looked at it twice during the meal. He said nothing. Afterward, when Oliver had thanked them both with his customary brevity and gone, and when the household staff had cleared with the quiet efficiency that Agnes maintained, with the focused energy of someone who regards the clearing of a table as a professional matter, they were left in the small dining room alone. She refilled her water glass. He sat with his wine, which he was not drinking, which she had also noted about him, that he poured wine out of social habit, and then largely did not drink it. "The parcel," he said. "From Director Adwell." "Yes. Oliver told me it had arrived." "A ring," she said. She held up her right hand. He looked at it. She could see him looking at the pattern in the band, trying to place it. "The pattern," he said. "I do not know its specific meaning yet. The director's letter does not explain it. He says there is accompanying documentation in the council's holding that provides context." She lowered her hand. "My mother will know when she sees it." He nodded. They sat in the small dining room in the quiet of a November evening, with the fire going down, not enough to warrant adding more wood, but enough that the room was still warm. "When Oliver read me the 2 words from the archive," he said, "my first thought was about the Eastern Territories." She looked at him. "I am being honest with you," he said. "My first thought was strategic. It was about what that name, attached to this match, would mean for the 6 years of legitimization work I have been trying to do. The political weight of it, the commercial implications." He paused. "I want you to know that I understand that this is a strange way to respond to learning that the woman you are about to marry is carrying a history most people believed was gone." She was quiet, not because she was surprised, but because she was deciding whether this deserved the answer that was forming. "It is not strange," she said. "It is accurate. The strategic implications are real. Noting them is not a failure to note the other things." She looked at the ring on her right hand. "My mother's first thought, when she made the name change, was about protecting her daughters. Her second thought was about maintaining the right connections, so that the daughters could eventually survive without the protection. Both thoughts were true at the same time." He looked at her. "I am not bothered that the strategic implications were your first thought," she said. "I am more interested in what your second thought was." He was quiet for a moment. He turned the wineglass without lifting it. "My second thought," he said, "was that I had been right about one thing and wrong about another." "Which thing were you right about?" "I was right that I needed to stop looking for what I had lost," he said. He said it with the careful precision of someone who has worked out the exact words required for something and is using them exactly. "I was right that I could not survive another version of what I had had. I was right that the kind of person I needed beside me was not the kind of person the court would notice first." She listened. "What I was wrong about," he said, "was that plain and ordinary are the same thing." She looked at him. He looked back. "You are the plainest person I have ever met," he said, "in the sense that you are exactly what you are, all the way through. There is no difference between what you show and what is there. No performance, no management, no constructed version that you put in front of the real one." He paused. "I had confused that quality with ordinariness, because I had never encountered it before without it being accompanied by a great deal of effort to be noticed." She was still. "You are not ordinary," he said. "You have never been ordinary for a single moment since you walked into this house. But you are plain, and I was right that plain was what I needed." He picked up the wineglass. He set it down again. "I did not know those were two different things until I found one of them." She looked at him for a long time. He did not look away. She said, "I came here knowing what you had lost. I knew her name and something of her history. I knew you had been deliberate about what you asked for afterward. I understood why." She paused. "I was not trying to be a replacement. I was not trying to be a contrast. I was trying to be what I am, and to see whether what I am was something that worked in this specific situation. And is it? You tell me," she said. He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Yes," he said. One word, precisely used. No qualification, no expansion. She nodded. They sat in the warm room as the fire went down to its lowest. She said, after a while, "There is something I want to tell you, about the name, about what it has meant, in practice, to my family." He waited. "The protection cost something," she said. "My grandmother paid it. My mother paid it. Margot paid it. The name being buried meant that every connection to what it represented had to be maintained secretly or not at all. My mother's ability to educate us, to prepare us, was limited by what could be done without attracting the kind of attention the name would have attracted." She paused. "I know things that I should have been taught formally. I had to find most of it on my own, or from Margot, who was careful about what she gave me, because she was careful about everything." She looked at him. "There are gaps in what I know. I want you to understand that." "Gaps," he said. "The governance of a large household," she said. "The specific protocols of court engagement at the level we are now operating at. I have been navigating them by reading behavior and adjusting, but I have not had formal training, and there will be situations where that gap is visible." He looked at her. "Everyone in this palace," he said, "has gaps." "Yes," she said, "but some gaps are more expensive than others." "Tell me when you encounter one," he said. "I will tell you when I encounter yours, before you have noticed it. That is a reasonable arrangement." She looked at him. "You will notice them. I notice most things." "I know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You have been very careful not to assume that this is more than it is," he said. "The arrangement. What has developed within it." She said nothing. "I have been doing the same," he said, "for reasons of my own that you already understand." She said nothing. "I am telling you," he said, with the careful precision of someone using words exactly, "that I think we may be past the point where that care is necessary. In the same direction, from both of us." She looked at him. He was still, the way he was still, with the weight of a door that has been closed properly, with the sense of something solid behind it. "Yes," she said. The fire had gone entirely down now. The room was warm still, the stones holding what they had been given. They sat in the particular quiet of two people who have said what needs to be said and do not need anything more than the fact of having said it. The ring on her right hand caught what was left of the light, the old pattern in the band, the name too small to read from across the table. It was there. That was enough. Eleanor Aldine arrived at Ashenvale on a Tuesday morning, with one trunk and Clara beside her. Clara had not been invited specifically. She had heard that her mother was making the journey, and had announced, in the practical tone of the Aldine women at their most determined, that she was coming too. And Eleanor had not argued, because Eleanor had learned, over 24 years of parenting Clara, that arguing with Clara required more energy than the outcome usually justified. The carriage came through the gate in the rain, which was fitting in the way that November rain is always fitting, committed and gray, and without apology. Mara was in the courtyard when they arrived. She was there because she had arranged to be there, which required getting up earlier than usual, and managing the morning in a specific order, and she had done this without mentioning it to Agnes or Oliver, because she did not require assistance for the management of her own mornings. She stood in the courtyard in her plain gray cloak, hood up against the rain, and watched the carriage come through the gate. Eleanor stepped out first. She was 62 years old, and she moved with the careful precision of a woman who has maintained her physical function with the same deliberateness she maintained everything else, and who regards the process of stepping out of a carriage as requiring the same attention as any other task. She stood in the courtyard and looked at the palace, and then at Mara. Mara crossed the courtyard. Eleanor held her for a moment, the way she had held her at the door of the Western house, longer than usual. Then she stepped back and looked at her daughter with the straight, measuring gaze of a woman who is checking that what she is seeing is what she was told she would see. "You look well," she said. "I am well," Mara said. Clara came out of the carriage behind her mother and crossed the courtyard at speed, and held Mara in the way she had always held her, with the slightly excessive physical force of a person who is taller and whose affection expresses itself through compression. Mara received this without comment. "You did not tell me about the dress," Clara said. "Everyone has heard about the dress. 3 letters arrived at home before yours did. Cousins. People I have not spoken to in years." "I did not know about the letters," Mara said. "The court talks," Clara said. "Mother received a note from a woman she has not seen in 20 years, who said she wished to visit the Western Holdings in the spring. We do not know her." "You will know her by spring," Mara said. "Come inside." She brought them inside. Agnes was waiting with tea and the composed professionalism she brought to all arrivals, and George was on hand to deal with the trunk, and the whole machinery of the household absorbed Eleanor and Clara with the efficient warmth of a place that is good at receiving people. The Duke was in his study. He had been informed of the arrival time. He came to the small reception room at the appropriate interval, not so immediately as to suggest he had been waiting, not so delayed as to suggest he was indifferent. He was, Mara noted, wearing the particular version of his formal posture that she had identified as the one he used when he was taking a situation seriously, rather than merely presenting himself correctly. The difference was subtle, and would not have been apparent to anyone who had not been watching him carefully for several weeks. Eleanor looked at him the way Eleanor looked at most things, directly and without preliminary assessment. She was forming an assessment, but she was forming it from evidence rather than assumption. He shook her hand. He said something formal and correct and meant it, which was the thing about him. He said formal and correct things and meant them, which was more unusual than it should have been. Eleanor said she was grateful for the invitation. He said Mara's family was welcome at Ashenvale for as long as they wished to stay. Eleanor looked at Mara. Mara did not look at her mother. She was looking at the Duke with the expression she usually wore, direct and attentive, but with something behind it that was slightly different, a small warmth that Clara caught from across the room and stored without comment. Clara was good at storing things without comment. The Duke excused himself after the correct interval, and the household took over, Agnes directing everyone to appropriate rooms with the focused efficiency of a woman who has planned this in advance and is executing the plan. In Eleanor's room, which was large and had a window that looked east over the gardens, Mara sat in the chair while her mother unpacked the trunk with the systematic care of a woman who regards travel as requiring the same organization as everything else. "Tell me about him," Eleanor said, folding a nightgown into the top drawer of the dresser. "I will," Mara said. "What do you want to know?" "What he is like when you are not performing for each other." Mara considered this. "We do not perform for each other," she said. "It is the thing about him that is most—" She stopped, choosing the word. "Most useful. He is exactly what he is. There is no version of him that is constructed for the benefit of other people. When he is quiet, it is because he is thinking. When he speaks, he means it. When he says something costs him something, you can tell that it does." Eleanor folded a blouse. "And the cost of him? He has been very careful for a long time," Mara said. "He built a system for it. The system works well, and it is also a wall, and the wall is going to take time." She paused. "I do not mind time." Eleanor looked at her over the open trunk. "No," she said, "you never have. The ring came before you did," Mara said. "From the council. I have been wearing it." Eleanor's hands stopped. She turned. Mara held out her right hand. Eleanor crossed the room and took her daughter's hand in both of hers and looked at the ring. She looked at the pattern in the band for a long time. Her face was doing several things, and she was managing them with the practiced composure she had always managed things with. But her hands on Mara's hand were holding on the way hands hold things when the holding is the point. "Your grandmother's ring," she said. "I thought it might be," Mara said. "She had it when we left. She said she had given it into keeping for when it was safe." Eleanor's voice was even and precise. "I did not know she had given it to the council. I thought she had lost it." "She kept it," Mara said. "She kept it," Eleanor said. She held her daughter's hand for a moment more. Then she straightened. She returned to the unpacking, with the composure of a woman who has received something very large and is choosing to keep working. Because work is what you do when things are large. "The portraits," she said. "The council's director said 2 portraits. Yes, we will see them when you are ready to." "I am ready now," Eleanor said. "Tomorrow," Mara said. "The director is coming tomorrow. I asked him to come while you were here." Eleanor folded the last item in the trunk. She closed the lid with the precise click of someone who closes things deliberately. She turned and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her youngest daughter, who was sitting in the chair, with the ring on her right hand, and the plain gray cloak folded over the arm of the chair, and the direct, steady gaze she had always had, since she was old enough to have a gaze. "When you were 7 years old," Eleanor said, "you found the boundary marker at the south edge of our land, the one that had been in dispute with the neighbors for years. You found it by reading the original property description and walking the land with it. You were 7. "I know," Mara said. "I should have understood then," Eleanor said, "what you were going to do with your life." Mara looked at her. "You did understand," she said. "You sent me to Margot." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I sent you to Margot because she asked for you," she said. "She came to the house when you were 5 years old, and she sat in the kitchen and drank tea, and she said to me, without any particular ceremony, 'Your youngest one has the kind of mind that will either be used for something or will be spent on nothing, and I would like to be the one who makes sure it is used for something, if you will allow it.'" Mara looked at her mother. "I did not know who Margot was," Eleanor said. "Not then. Not for several years. By the time I understood, you were already 10, and she had given you half of what she knew, and there was no practical point in doing anything but letting her finish." She paused. "She told me, when she was dying, that she had prepared you, as well as she could, for a situation she could not predict. She said she hoped it would be enough." Mara was still. "She knew," Mara said. "She knew what you were," Eleanor said. "She believed the situation would come eventually. She did not know what form it would take." She paused. She would be satisfied, I think. Clara knocked on the door and came in without waiting, which was Clara's habit, and stopped when she saw the room. She read the quality of the silence correctly and came in without speaking, and sat on the window seat and looked out at the east gardens in the November rain. The three of them sat in the room together for a while. There was a great deal that did not need to be said because it had been said, or because it was understood, or because some things are better held than spoken. Eventually Clara said, "The library. Tell me about the library." Mara told her about the library. Director Adwell arrived the next morning at 10. He was a small man, 70 years old, with the particular quality of scholars who have spent a lifetime in archives, a sort of dense, contained energy that has nowhere to go except inward, where it has built a very complete interior world. He carried a leather case that was old but well maintained. He had brought 2 assistants who stood near the door, with the deferential posture of people who understand their role is to be useful and not visible. He was received in the main drawing room. The Duke was present. Oliver was present. Eleanor and Clara and Mara were present. The director looked at all of them with the specific attention of someone who has been working toward this day for 30 years and is now deciding if the day looks the way he imagined it. It did not, probably. Days rarely do. He opened the leather case with the care of a man handling things that matter to people. The correspondence was first. A set of letters, 32 of them, tied with a linen ribbon, from the original period. They were in good condition, which was a testament to the council's preservation methods, and they were addressed in a handwriting Eleanor recognized as her grandmother's. She held the stack with both hands, and did not immediately read them, simply held them, with the expression of someone who is experiencing the weight of something, before they are ready to experience the content. The property records were next. Documentation of the original holdings, before the disruption, before the name change, before everything that had led to a minor house in the Western Territories, with a quiet daughter, who read maintenance logs and found boundary errors. And then the director reached into the case and removed the portraits. They were small, not the large formal portraits that hung in palace galleries, but the smaller, personal kind, the ones made for private keeping rather than public display. 2 of them, in matching frames that suggested they had been made at the same time. He set them on the table. Eleanor crossed to the table. She stood in front of them. The first portrait was of a woman. She was perhaps 40, painted with the clear-eyed quality of a painter who had known the subject well. The woman had dark hair and a particular set to her jaw that was, looking at it, immediately familiar to anyone in the room who had been observing Mara for the past several weeks. The second portrait was of a young girl. She could not have been more than 6 or 7. She was sitting in a chair with the slightly impatient energy of a child who has been told to sit still and is managing it with the focused effort of someone who has decided to cooperate, but has not decided to be comfortable about it. The girl had gray eyes. Clear, direct, gray eyes. Clara made a sound. Eleanor did not make any sound at all. Mara looked at the portrait of the small girl, and the small girl's gray eyes, and the particular set of her jaw, which was also familiar, and was quiet for a long time. "Your grandmother," Director Adwell said, gently, indicating the second portrait, "in childhood, and your great-grandmother." Eleanor sat down. She sat down in the way of someone who needs to sit, not for dramatic reasons, but because the room has become too full of something to stand in comfortably. Clara sat beside her. She took her mother's hand. Mara remained standing. She looked at the portrait of the small girl for a long time. Then she looked at Director Adwell. "The council," she said. "How long have you been waiting?" "I personally, 30 years, he said. "The council, 60. He paused. "We were founded by people who believed the situation would eventually resolve. We did not know when. We did not know how. We continued regardless." He looked at the portraits, then at Mara. "We are very glad it has resolved in the manner it has." She looked at the portrait of the small girl with the gray eyes and the slightly impatient energy. She thought about Margot, who had probably known exactly who the small girl in the portrait was, and who had sat in Eleanor's kitchen and drunk tea, and said, "Your youngest one has the kind of mind that will either be used for something or spent on nothing." She thought about all the things she had found by reading carefully. The boundary maps and the river course, and the supply contract, and the maintenance logs, and the Vethric texts, and the leather book in the wall of the north corridor. She thought about what it meant to be prepared for a situation you could not predict. She looked at the Duke, who was standing near the window, watching with the expression that was his fourth expression, the one she had not yet found a full name for. He looked back at her, with the directness that was, she had decided some time ago, one of the things she valued most specifically about him. She turned back to the director. "We have a great deal of work to do," she said. "The formal documentation, the historical record, the announcement." She paused. "I would like to begin today, if you are able." The director opened his hands in the gesture of a man who has been ready for 30 years. "I am able," he said. They sat down to work. Eleanor held the small stack of letters in her lap, the ones in her grandmother's handwriting, and read them one by one in the quiet of her corner of the room, while the business of history unfolded around her with the focused, practical energy that her youngest daughter brought to all things that needed doing. Clara watched everything with the expression she had worn since childhood, when Mara was in the middle of something, a look that was partly wonder, and partly the particular fond pride of someone who has known since the beginning that their person was going to do something eventually, and is now watching the eventually arrive. The rain had stopped. Through the drawing room windows, the east gardens were wet and clear in the late morning light, the bare trees sharp against the pale sky. The Duke looked at Mara across the table, where she was already reading through the council's documentation, with the complete focused attention of someone who has found the next piece of work. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. They worked. The work took 3 days. Not because the documentation was unclear, but because there was a great deal of it, and because clarity was required, and because the director was a man who had spent 30 years maintaining a record, and was not going to see it entered into the official archive carelessly. He worked methodically. He worked with Oliver, whose systematic efficiency matched the director's in ways that both men seemed to appreciate without commenting on it, and who produced, by the end of the second day, a formal documentation structure that the director reviewed with his pencil and marked at 4 points, and returned to Oliver for revision, and which Oliver revised without visible irritation, and which they both agreed was improved. Mara worked on the historical narrative. This was her task, and the director had given it to her, without asking the Duke's permission, which she found interesting, and which the Duke did not comment on. The historical narrative was the formal account of the family's history that would accompany the documentation, establishing the continuity from the original name to the current situation. It needed to be accurate. It needed to be complete. It needed to be written in language that was both legally sufficient and humanly true. She wrote it 4 times. The first version was too precise, too legalistic, stripped of everything that would make a reader understand what had actually happened. She set it aside. The second version overcompensated. She cut 6 pages. The third version was close, but there was a passage in the middle section, the part describing the name change and the reasons for it, that she read back twice and found false. Not factually false, tonally false. It described the name change as a strategic decision when it had been, at its core, a decision made by a woman who was afraid for her children and had done what was available to her to protect them. She rewrote the passage. The 4th version was right. She knew it was right because she read it once and did not want to change anything, which was the only reliable test she had for her own writing. She handed it to the director. He read it. He did not say anything immediately. He read it a second time. He made one mark, a small pencil mark at the top of the 3rd page. Not a correction, a note to himself. He looked up. "This is exactly what it needs to be," he said. She nodded. "The passage about the name change," he said. "There will be people who read this document who were in the original conflict. People who were on the wrong side of it. This passage will not allow them to pretend they did not know what they were doing." "No," she said. "That is the correct decision," he said. "It is also the more difficult one." "Yes," she agreed. He handed the document to Oliver. Oliver added it to the formal package. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, the documentation was complete, and the director signed the council's verification at the bottom of the final page, with the signature of a man completing something he has been building toward for 30 years. Eleanor signed as a family witness. The Duke signed as the Duke. Oliver countersigned as the household's official administrator. Mara signed last, in the clean, deliberate hand that every document she had signed in this house had been signed with, followed by a small, deliberate period. The director folded his hands on the table and looked at the completed package. "The Central Archive," he said. "We will file within the week. Once it is in the archive, it is a matter of public record." "Yes," the Duke said. "The announcement," Oliver said. "The timing." They looked at each other, the small group around the table, the people who had been present for the work. Mara looked at the Duke. "The Vethric Agreement is finalized tomorrow," she said. "The Survey Commission is issued next week." He nodded. "Then the announcement can be made the week after," she said, "when both of those things are already established facts. The name is then context for the arrangement, rather than the arrangement itself." "Agreed," he said. The director was listening with the expression of a man who has waited 30 years and is now watching the people who are going to do the last part do it correctly. "The public announcement," he said carefully. "The council would like to be represented at the formal occasion, if one is planned. The elder of the Vethric Trading Company also wishes to be present," Oliver said. The director looked at Oliver. Something passed between the two of them. The recognition of people who understand that a thing has been arranged correctly when all the pieces arrive in the right sequence. "We will coordinate," the director said. Oliver nodded. Eleanor, sitting in her corner with the letters folded in her lap, spoke for the first time in several hours. "When is the marriage?" she said. The Duke looked at her. 2 months, he said. "In January." Eleanor nodded. "You will come," Mara said to her. It was not a question. "Of course," Eleanor said, and Clara. Clara, who had been quiet in her window seat for most of the third day, listening with the attention of someone who is choosing to remember everything, said, "I would like to bring my husband, if that is acceptable." The Duke looked at her with the expression of a man who has not yet absorbed the full scope of what it means to have acquired not just a betrothed, but an entire family with opinions about attendance. "Of course," he said. Clara smiled. It was the smile of a woman who has been managing worry for several months, and is now, finally, setting most of it down. The director's assistants collected the materials from the table, with the careful reverence of archivists, who know that the things they are handling matter. The leather case was repacked. The formal documentation was placed in a separate sealed folder with the council's stamp. The director shook everyone's hand in turn. He shook Mara's last. "Your grandmother," he said, and stopped, and started again. "There are things in the correspondence that I believe you will want to read alone. Before you share them with anyone else. There is a letter addressed to whoever came after." He paused. "To whoever eventually found their way back." She looked at him. "She wrote it in the last year of her life," he said. "She did not know who would read it. She did not know if anyone would read it. She wrote it anyway." He handed her a separate envelope, not the stack of letters tied with ribbon, but a single letter in a separate envelope that he had kept at the bottom of the leather case until this moment. She took it. "Thank you," she said. He bowed his head slightly. He left. The drawing room was quiet after the director and his assistants had gone. Oliver excused himself. The Duke stood at the window, looking out at the late afternoon light over the east gardens. Eleanor and Clara were speaking quietly on the other side of the room, their heads together, the particular quality of a mother and daughter who know each other well enough to speak in shorthand. Mara sat at the table with the letter in both hands. She looked at it for a long time. The envelope was old. The paper had yellowed at the edges with the yellowing of age and careful storage. The writing on the outside was in a hand she did not know, an older script, the letters formed with the deliberateness of someone who had learned to write when writing was a more considered act. It said, "To whoever comes after." She opened it. She read it. She read it again. She set it down with both hands on the table and sat with her eyes on it. The Duke turned from the window. He looked at her. He did not come across the room. He was too perceptive for that. Which was the thing about him. He was very perceptive about when presence was the thing required, and when space was the thing required. He stayed at the window. She sat at the table. She was not crying. It was not that kind of large. It was the kind of large that is very quiet, the kind that fills a room without making noise. After a while she looked up. He was still at the window, looking at her with the expression that was his fourth expression, which she had a name for now. She had found the name sometime in the last 2 weeks, in the specific ordinary moments between the working and the eating and the walking and the talking, and the name was not a complicated word, but it was the right one. It was simply care. Not the managed, deliberate, careful care of a man who has built a system for himself and operates within it. The other kind. The kind that arrives without being constructed. The kind that exists because it exists, and there is no particular system for it. She folded the letter back into the envelope. She stood. She crossed the room and stood beside him at the window. He looked at her. She said, Mara said, and stopped. He waited. She said that she hoped whoever came after her would find a place that was worth the long way around. She looked out the window at the east gardens, the wet paths, the bare trees, the late afternoon light doing what it did here, the thing it did nowhere else she had been. She said she had hoped for that. She said she believed it was possible. She said that the people she came from had always believed, even when it was very difficult to believe, that the long way around could arrive somewhere worthwhile. She stopped. He was quiet. I think, she said, she would find this worthwhile. He looked at her profile in the window light. I asked for the plain one, he said. He said it the way he had said it in the East Library, the first time. But it was different now, because they were different now, and the difference was everything. She turned her head and looked at him. They sent me the only one, he said. It was very quiet in the drawing room. Outside, the East Gardens held the last of the light the way the gardens did here, carefully, longer than you expected. She did not say anything. She did not need to. They stood at the window as the light went. The announcement was made on a Friday. Not at the palace. Not in the Hall of Mirrors, which would have been the expected venue, the ceremonial space, the room designed for declarations. The Duke chose the Provincial Council chamber, which was a different kind of room entirely. It was a working room, built for governance rather than ceremony, with a large table at its center, and maps on 3 of its 4 walls and shelves of provincial records along the 4th. It was the room where decisions that actually affected people's lives were made, and that was why he chose it. Oliver had argued, mildly, for the Hall of Mirrors. The Duke had considered this argument and set it aside. The council members were present, Lord Farrow, Lord Bassett, Lord Crane, and 2 more from the Eastern Committee, who had been waiting with varying degrees of patience for the formal announcement that the betrothal had implied without stating. The Vethric elder was present, seated near the map wall, with the placid patience of a man who knows he is where he is supposed to be. Director Adwell was present with 2 of his senior council members. Lady Surratt was present, which she had arranged for herself through the correct channels, and which the Duke had allowed. Mara was present. She was sitting at the council table, which was not where a betrothed woman had traditionally sat at a provincial announcement. She was sitting at the table because she was going to be required to speak at one point, and standing from a side chair to speak was the kind of theatrical staging that none of them had any interest in. The Duke stood at the head of the table. He spoke for 4 minutes, which was the correct length for what he was saying. He described the betrothal. He described the formal documentation filed with the Central Archive. He described the historical record that the filing had established. He described the name, the original one, the real one, not the one that had been carefully and necessarily buried for 60 years, and he said it the way you say things that are true, plainly, without ceremony, without preparation for reaction. The room was very quiet. Lord Farrow looked at Director Adwell. Lord Bassett looked at the map on the wall closest to him, which was the Eastern Province map, which he had been looking at for 11 years, in the context of a boundary dispute that was now, in the specific light of what was being said, considerably more legible than it had been before. Lord Crane looked at Mara. Lady Sarah did not look at anyone. She was very still, listening, with the expression of a woman who has heard something she already knew stated publicly for the first time, and who is assessing the difference between the knowing and the public stating. The Vethric elder was looking at his hands. The Duke finished. He sat. There was a silence. Then Lord Bassett, who was a man who did not leave silences to be filled by the wrong thing, said, "The Eastern Territories claim." "Yes," the Duke said. "The documentation establishes a continuous line," Bassett said. From the original holding to the current arrangement. Yes. The boundary dispute, Bassett said. And this was not a question. It was the sound of a man whose 11 years of patience had just encountered the resolution it had been waiting for, and was taking a moment to verify that the resolution was real. The crossing. The survey will establish the current river position, the Duke said. The Vethric Agreement provides the independent commercial documentation of route viability. The historical record provides the legal framework for the territory claim. He paused. Together. Bassett nodded. He looked at the map on the wall. He looked at it with the expression of someone who has been reading a document in insufficient light for 11 years and has just been handed a lamp. Lord Pharaoh said something about the commercial implications that was practical and correct. Lord Crane said something about representation that was slightly ambitious but not unreasonable. The two Eastern Committee members asked 2 questions each, both of them good ones, both of which Oliver answered from the prepared material. Director Adwell spoke about the Council's role and the historical record's accessibility and the timeline for public documentation. And then the Duke looked at Mara and inclined his head slightly, which was the signal she had been given. She stood. She had prepared this, and she had not prepared it, in the sense that she had thought about what needed to be said, and she had not written it out, because writing it out would have given it the quality of a presentation, and it needed to have the quality of a statement. She had the distinction between those 2 things clearly in mind. The Eastern Territories, she said. The claim is historical. The claim is also practical. The practical shape of it is this. She reached across the table and turned the Eastern Province map to face the room. She indicated 3 points on the map with the same systematic efficiency she had used in the old library, pointing to the thing itself rather than talking around it. The Celt crossing, viable once the boundary is formally established. The coastal route, commercially documented by the trading company. The territory claim, established by the historical record. 3 separate pieces that have been worked on separately for 6 years, 11 years, and 60 years respectively. She looked at the room. They are one piece, she said. They have always been one piece. We are now in a position to treat them as one piece. She paused. That is what today establishes. The rest is work. She sat down. The Vethric elder, from his position near the map wall, made a sound. It was not a word in any language. It was the sound a person makes when they have observed something that confirms a long-held view, and they are allowing themselves a single moment of audible satisfaction. Lord Bassett looked at the Duke. The Duke looked at Mara. She was looking at the Eastern Province map with the practical attention of someone who is already thinking about the next thing. The meeting moved forward into its working phase, and the working phase had the quality of a meeting that knows it is getting somewhere. The questions were specific. The answers were prepared. The timeline was laid out clearly by Oliver, who laid out timelines with the precision of a man who has spent decades making sure things happen when they are supposed to happen. Lady Surratt said very little during the working phase. She listened with her full attention, the kind of attention she brought to things she was genuinely studying. At one point, she caught Mara's eye across the table, briefly. Mara held her gaze for a second and then looked back at the map. Surratt made a small mark in the notebook she carried to all meetings. The mark was not words. It was 2 lines, angled, the kind of mark you make when you are updating